Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, spirits of all ages, welcome to the BlunderSpeaker Show. Yes, indeed, folks. Welcome back to the BlunderSpeaker Show. An absolute pleasure to have you here. I'm laughing to myself because it has been an absolute evening of it. You know me, I can't start without jumping or stumbling or doing some sort of mess as part of the intro. But we're here. We're finally started. It is Wednesday, the 9th of April, and it is currently 2 minutes past 11. And that is PM, of course, not AM. I did say we've had an evening of it. I'm going to get into that in a moment. My name is Tepid Goose. As always, I'm your host, and welcome to the BlunderSpeaker Show. This is, of course, the show where we talk everything Spirit Island, we play Spirit Island, we talk about it afterwards, we go through all the details, we talk about everything there is to offer in the game, and it is an absolute pleasure to have you here. If you're returning, of course, if you aren't returning and you're here to the show for the first time, you're probably wondering why I've had such a bad intro and why I've stumbled through the last 2 minutes. That is because we are doing this all in one take. That is the premise and the name of the game, and that is why indeed it's called BlunderSpeaker, because I tend to blunder, I tend to stutter, I tend to stumble a little bit, especially as part of the intro, especially when I'm getting warmed up. But I'm getting warmed up right now. As I say, it's been pretty good weather. It was good weather when we played with Relentless Gaze of the Sun as part of the playthrough last week, and it continues to be good weather out there. So I've got my beer, I've got my sparkling water. We're going to get into that in a moment. But as I say, welcome. We're here to talk about the purpose of this episode. I probably should have gotten into that before now. We're here to talk about the Habsburg mining expedition, of course. That is the what are we, 5th now out of 8 adversaries. So we're ticking along nicely. We've got half of them done. We're into the second half now, and things are starting to get a little bit tricky. I did mention before, of course, that I do find that these are in the top half, as I say, of the difficulties. But we're going to get into sort of all of that and what it means and everything else. I'll give you a little rundown what the episode's going to be tonight. So we are going to go a little bit through the adversary panel. We're going to obviously talk through kind of top to bottom about sort of who HME are and what they do. We're going to get into then all the community inputs, of which there are many, and as usual, very, very good inputs from everybody, so huge appreciation and thanks to everybody who's gotten involved. After that, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at how HME are looking to beat us, and then of course we'll follow that up with how we're looking to beat them. So lots of tips and tricks. If you've been struggling with HME in particular in the past, you want to hang on, you want to find out exactly how we're going to go ahead and beat them as well. And then finally I'll do a little bit of a rundown on the playthrough that I did versus HME, depending on what time it is when we get there. That'll be long after midnight, I imagine, at this stage. But that's going to be the situation, and then we'll close out at the end with what's going to be coming up next. And I have some pretty exciting news as well as part of all of that, so we will get there eventually, as I say. But look, I'm going to start. I'm going to grab myself a beer, reminisce a little bit on the evening that's come before me before I jump into the adversary panel. It's been emotional. As I say, we're now 11:05, so I was working hard for a number of hours to prepare the show this afternoon. My darling wife was minding the kids, of course, as she always does, while I'm busy and hard at work on the old podcast. Then things took a little bit of a turn for the worse when I started tinkering with settings. I've talked in the past about the rig and the setup and the equipment and all that sort of stuff, and unfortunately I thought I had the audio issue sorted by getting the new boom arm, adding that to the whole setup. And I've mentioned it, of course, on previous episodes how I keep thinking I have it done, and then again I think it was the playthrough with Gaze and ThunderSpeaker, which we'll talk about. I started to hear this squealing again, this high pitched ringing sound, and I was lucky I noticed it because it only comes and goes, So I'm kind of, when I'm doing the editing process, especially especially for the playthroughs, I'm not watching back the whole thing as I tend to do with the podcast, so I don't pick up on it maybe, or at least I may not pick up on it. And as it happened, I spotted it. I found it in this thing, and again, it takes me so long to go through and apply all this post-production filters and try to fix the audio, and I do believe I got it cleaned up, which I was thankful for, without too much kind of distortion or sort of issues with the voice, let's say. But I still not 100% sure where it's coming from. I had said before I thought it was due to the proximity with kind of the wires and the various other things. That may still be the case, but I had that way up off the table, so I had it up here. Now for today, you can see here the mic is kind of situated down as close as I can get it to me, without me knocking off it, because I tend to, as you probably know by now, speak with my hands and speak with my arms and do all this kind of stuff. So I've got it as close as I can get it to my face, where I hope the sound is going to be okay. But yeah, as the evening went on, I started tinkering, things started breaking. I had to start, basically delete everything and start from scratch, essentially, with all the settings and stuff that I had kind of curated over time. So yeah, it wasn't great. It wasn't ideal. I'm not going to lie. It took me several hours to get all of that kind of stuff cleaned up and back to a point where I believe it's kind of working again. And I had to add a good at least minute and a half to 2 minutes on top of all of that to explain to you my poor woes. But that is how that's all gone. I do have a beer. It's a Sierra Nevada hazy little thing IPA. If you have a look at it, there, it was a kind of a catchy looking can. I picked 2 of these up yesterday on the way home. I was out helping my dad with some moving of concrete and things yesterday. We did a bit of hard graft in the sun, and I was on my way home. I dropped into the shop and picked up a couple of beers, and I thought that was quite an enticing looking can. Get home, open it up, realise that's a terrible beer. It's not good at all. And the worst part is, once I had drank about half of the first can of it, I realised I've had this beer before and I hated it the last time too. So I bought 2 cans of this beer that I do not particularly enjoy, because the can looks pretty shiny and cool. I think the branding had changed. I think that's why I had forgotten I had it before. So I have a beer this evening that I'm not particularly enamoured by, but alas, that's the way it goes. It's beer. And there's a lot of it at the very least. It's a very large can, which is probably what drew me to it, as well as the colouring and the branding, truth be told. But that's all out of the way. 7 minutes 30 for the opening gambit. My usual stumble and mumble and fumble my way through the whole thing, but we have reached time to actually start our episode and our analysis on HME themselves. So let's go ahead and look at the adversary panel. So, starting at the top left, that's where we always start, of course, and we look at the additional loss condition, of which there is one, of course, here. It's going to be called Land Stripped Bare. And again, before we even get into this, it's worth pointing out that we are talking with the Habsburg mining expedition. This is the second Habsburg that were released as part of this game. So one of 8 total adversaries, 2 of which are both the Habsburg dynasty, so to speak, which was a decision that I'm particularly not convinced by. Truth be told, I'm not in love with the fact that you have two Habsburgs. It's confusing. It's a little bit strange. You end up with a bunch of these little tokeny boys here, which I love. The little tokens and the reminder tokens for the invader actions, but now you've got like 7 of them thrown in there that all look the same, and you have to dig in to really see whether they have the pickaxe or not. So yeah, I mean, look, there's obviously a flavor thing going on here, and we'll get into the flavor around these, which I think is very good. But they tried to kind of link them with the other Habsburg, and I'm conscious that we haven't actually covered the other Habsburg yet. Spoiler alert, I find that the other Habsburg livestock colony are more difficult than HME because we haven't done them yet. So they're yet to come. But look, a little bit strange, to be honest with you, that they made two Habsburgs. There's obviously a storytelling aspect of this, and again, like everything that happens in this game, Eric Royce and his vision for this was not done at random. There was a very distinct reason why he chose to have 2 Habsburgs here. It's a storytelling reason. For me, what you gain on the storytelling side of things, you more than lose on the side of sort of conflicting and confusing sort of aspect, or just again, just slightly jarring. The fact that you've just got the same thing kind of but different. Anyway, look, a decision was made. Anyway, that's enough of that. Let's actually get into this additional loss condition. So what is it called? It's called land stripped bare. It says, at the end of the fast phase, the invaders win if any land has at least 8 total invaders / blight combined. Okay, so couple of things at play here. At the end of the fast phase. So this, and by the way, it should be noted that Habsburg Mining Expedition are the most recent adversary added to the roster. I should have probably said that up front here, which is quite important. They came as part of the Nature Incarnate expansion. So the most recent expansion for the game contained this particular adversary, and we can see some sort of some clues, let's say, towards that as part of their kind of construction here, and this is the very first clue right here, is at the end of the fast phase you're going to hit your loss condition, which has not been the case for a variety of the loss conditions up until now with the other adversaries. So it's basically you're going to get the check at the end of the fast phase. So you've got a fast phase to kind of deal with your problems before you lose, essentially. That's what it's giving you here. It's not going to be like something like France, for example, which we've already done the analysis on, where you place your last town and you lose. In this case, with the HME, you can have a land that has 8, 9, 10, however many total invaders and blight combined, as long as you clean that up before the end of the fast phase. Then you're going to do the check. And yeah, that's the check. It is basically quite straightforward. It's the invaders win if any land has at least 8 total invaders / blight combined. Now that's quite, again, a distinct choice, quite different to what we've seen with others so far. Again, France, for example, is very much towns based. England, who we haven't gotten into, is based on the number of buildings, so towns and cities, for example. But here we're going invaders / blight, so it can be any combination, obviously, of both. You could have 7 blight and 1 invader, or vice versa, 7 invaders and 1 blight, which you're certainly more likely to have than 7 blight, I would say. But yeah, it's not impossible, I guess. But that's going to be it. And needless to say, you're going to have various elements of the adversary that kind of contribute towards this, as we see with all the other adversaries. So that's going to be the baseline, let's say, that we have to keep in mind as we start to work through how this adversary plays. So up next then you've got the escalation. Escalation is called mining tunnels, and this says after advancing the invader cards on each board, explore in 2 lands whose terrains don't match a ravage or a build card. So again, how does this work? So it's after advancing the invader cards. That's the first important thing to remember here. So when you explore, you place your explorers and so on, and then you move the explore card across basically into the build card. So you do your standard advanced thing. So that's going to now it's going to be in the build slot, and obviously whatever just kind of build has shifted over to the ravage slot. So that's fine. And they're your 2 cards that we're checking. Now, we're checking by terrain here. So essentially, we look at those 2 terrains, whatever they are, mountains, wetlands, for example, if we took those as the 2 kind of terrains there, we now have to look on the board, and we need to, on each board, pick 2 lands whose terrains do not match a mountains and a wetlands. So obviously there you've got sands and jungles as your other 2 options. You need to pick 2 of those lands, basically, and you can pick 2 sands, you can pick 2 jungles, you could mix and match and so on, and you need to now go ahead and explore there. Important to note here, it does mention it in parentheses, it says no source required. So this is one of those cases where, for example, if you've got a pocket on the inland and you've kind of, got no sort of adjacent sources for invaders, you will still have to explore here. So you're not allowed to kind of cheat the system or game the system in that sense. But one thing you could do, for example, is you could use a wilds token to prevent the explore. So this is still an explore action. So a wilds token would prevent that explore. Similarly for an isolate, if you've got an isolate set up here, this will actually sort of eat one of these explorers as well here, and the explorer will not explore in that case. So quite nice. There is a bit of interplay there. You've got sort of some amount of agency in terms of obviously which land you're going into, as well as kind of setting up some tricks like let's say isolate or wilds. And I should have pointed out here, so the isolation in particular, it's worth noting, if you isolate the land that you would explore into, that's fine, that'll work. But if you isolate one of the other lands that are adjacent to it, that won't stop the kind of source. So you know, the usual trick with isolate is often you'll isolate the land with the building so that you prevent the sources for an exploration. You kind of create a pocket, so to speak, using isolate. That would not work here because there is no source required. So isolating the adjacent land with the building won't work, but if you isolate a particular land, you can stop an explorer going into that land. So just a little bit of a sort of a difference in how those two things would work there. So that's your escalation. It's called mining tunnels. So after that, then, of course, we've got our 6 levels. We always do. It's going to go up as far as a difficulty 10. They're going to start with a base difficulty of, it actually doesn't say it here on the card. It's going to be 1 or 2. I can't remember which. And it's going to go all the way up to a level 10. And then the fear cards, of course, then they're going to do the usual, start with a 3-3-3, and it's going to go all the way up to a 4-5-4. So in this case, actually very low amount of fear cards. They're very much on the lower end of things. Obviously, we saw before that Brandenburg Prussia was a 4-4-4. HME is going to be a 4-5-4, so slightly more. Just a handful. I think there's about 2 or 3 total adversaries that have this same kind of 13 total cards. So again, that's kind of something to look out for here. Potentially a way to attack them is thinking about the fear deck. So we're going to go to level 1. Level 1 is called Avarice Rewarded. Well, you've actually got two. You've essentially got 2 rules within level 1, which is a little bit, I think, unique. I'm pretty certain no other adversary does this. This is the only adversary where you've got kind of 2 rules within one. And you have essentially here, you've got Avarice Rewarded. It's going to be whenever blight added by a ravage action would cascade, instead upgrade an explorer or a town. And then in parentheses it says before Dahan counterattack. So let's break this down. And by the way, I also should mention up at the top here, this is quite a complex adversary, right? We're not difficult, right? Put difficulty aside for a moment. Complexity wise, this is probably your most complex adversary. I think probably most people would agree with that. And I think I remember in one of our recent podcast episodes, one of the commenters on the community inputs did a kind of a breakdown of the complexity of the various adversaries, and they said that HME alone stood as your kind of very high, so to speak, complexity, and we're starting to get into exactly why here. So first thing is, when you add a blight essentially by a ravage, if you're ravaging into a blighted land, under normal circumstances, of course, that creates a cascade. However, against HME, instead of doing the cascade and putting a blight in an adjacent land, you instead upgrade either an explorer or a town in the land that just ravaged. So, I mean, in a sense, it's straightforward, right? It's quite sort of simple. It turns off cascades from ravages, right? That's important here. When the blight will be added by a ravage action, so that will not count for things like events that force you to place blight, or power cards that force you to do it. There's a whole bunch, blighted island cards. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that will add blight to the game in ways other than a ravage action, and they're not affected. It's only a ravage action that would do this. And yeah, when it happens, you don't cascade, you instead upgrade an explorer or a town. So it's, in a way, they make your blight lost condition less of a concern, because of course you're putting it out at a slower speed, so to speak. At least as far up until now on the adversary card. We'll find out more, of course, as we continue. But in theory, this at least slows down your blight loss condition. And the trade-off here is that, of course, you're adding kind of a point of power and toughness, or a point of health and offense. How do they call that? Your attack is increased by 1 and your health is increased by 1. I play this game enough, I should know exactly what the terminology should be, but in theory you go from an explorer to a town, or a town to a city, so you're upgrading it by 1 point either way. And this will happen before the hand counterattack, so that's important to note here. Won't be coming up a huge amount. What essentially would have to happen here would be you would blight in a land with multiple to hand. If it's adding a blight, usually speaking, that's going to kill a to hand or multiple to hand. But if there's any to hand left behind, essentially, before they would counter attack back, you do the upgrade first and then you counter attack. So in some circumstances, that obviously can work to your advantage. Maybe you decide to upgrade a town to a city, then you attack back, kill a city instead of a town type of thing. You might get some bonus fear, for example. So it's not the most sort of common situation, but certainly something to look out for. That's your first part of level 1. We've got another part, and this is where things start getting interesting and complex. This is called ceaseless mining, and this is a big part of the identity of this adversary. Lands with 3 or more invaders are mining lands. There you go, in bold letters, mining lands, and this is hugely important. So in mining lands, disease and modifiers to disease affect ravage actions as though they were build actions. Okay, interesting. And during the build step, build cards cause ravage actions instead of build actions. Okay, so we're now looking at this strange dynamic of instead of building, you do something else. So let's break this down. It might be easier to take the second of these 2 bullet points and talk about that first. So in mining lands, and a mining land is any land where there are 3 or more invaders, and it can be any invader. 3 explorers works, 3 cities works. So in those lands, at all times in the game, during the build step, so whenever the card is in the build slot, build cards will cause a ravage action instead of a build action. So let's look at what that looks like concretely. Say for argument's sake, you've got 3 explorers or you've got 2 explorers in a mountain. The mountain explorers, you add 1 more, it goes up to 3, and then that card goes straight into your build slot to be building next turn. You go to your following turn and you go to the build step. Your mountain still has its 3 explorers sitting in there. Under normal circumstances, you just go ahead and you do a build, you'd add a town and you'd move on. But now, because there are 3 explorers in the land, instead of building, it's going to ravage. You basically replace one action with another action. Instead of a build, you do a ravage, which is very interesting. So that's the first bit. The second bit now is disease and modifiers to disease will affect ravage actions as though they were build actions. So now, again, you've got 3 lands in the mining land, and bear in mind this rule also only applies in mining lands. If I have a disease in that land now, again, under normal circumstances, if I got to the build and the disease was there, I would just remove the disease and I'd prevent the build. But now the disease is going to affect ravage actions, so again, sort of, by extension, you will now prevent the ravage action instead. So a little bit similar in terms of I either prevent the build during the build step, or now I prevent the ravage during the build step. So it kind of works the same way. The end result, essentially, it just stops the action is kind of what I'm getting at here. But interesting, very, very interesting here. So 2 different things to look out for. Of course, they're very similar in terms of where and what they affect, but they'll come up in different ways, let's say, throughout the game. And it is very important, as I say, to note that the disease will only work this way in the mining lands. So in another circumstance, if there were only two invaders in a land, and the land was about to ravage, if there was a disease in that land, it will not prevent the ravage. It'll only do so if there are 3 invaders in the land. So that's important to note here. Now, next up is going to be level 2. It's called Miners Come From Far and Wide. And this is a setup thing, so nice and easy. Add an explorer in each land with no Dahan. That's easy, first of all. So let's stop there. Basically, on each board, on the regular side, how do they call it? The arcade side or something like that. I can't remember what they call it, but the standard side that we all know and love, basically 8 lands, 2 of each type. On all, what are there now? There are, is it 8 or is there 10? A, B, C, D, E, F, and then you've got G and H, don't you? So you've got 8 lands, island boards, and all of them will have a setup of 4 lands contain Dahan and 4 lands don't. And not only that, most people probably know this, but it's just worth repeating. So 4 lands have the hand, 4 lands don't, and also the distribution across each will be 1 of each land type. So essentially 1 of each, 1 mountain, 1 jungle, 1 wetland, 1 sand will contain a Dahan, and then 1 of each will also not contain a Dahan. So in this particular case, as part of this setup, you will essentially add 1 explorer into 4 different land types on the board, and that'll be the ones with no Dahan in them. Also, add a disease and a city in the highest numbered land with a town setup symbol. So again, on your arcade side, your regular side, you will have 1 land number 2 starts with a city, and then 1 of your inner lands, usually around about 7 or 8, it will have a town setup symbol under normal circumstances. Now you go there and you add a disease and a city. So you build up that inner land, which is really quite interesting. So okay, so here clearly you're creating a bit of a problem land in land, and you're also sort of adding a disease in there, which is a little bit of a trade-off, right? It makes it a much harder land, but you've got that disease in there, which is usually going to help prevent the first ravage in that land. So it gives you a little bit of a kind of a slight reprieve when that land actually arrives as part of the explore, build, ravage cycle. So that's that. That's a setup thing. So now we go to level 3. This is called Mining Boom 1. So there's going to be a Mining Boom 1, and later on we're going to see a Mining Boom 2. This is Mining Boom 1, level 3. It's called, after the build step on each board, sorry, it's not called, this is what it does. After the build step on each board, choose a land with an explorer and upgrade an explorer there. Okay, so let's break that down. So this is after the build step. So first of all, right away, we do our build step. And again, because this is HME, sometimes the build step will involve actual builds, and other times the build step will involve ravages. And it could obviously be a mix and match depending on which lands are mining and which aren't. So we do all of that, we get it done. Now, after the build step, before we explore, we now have to choose, on each board, we need to pick a land that contains an explorer, and we have to upgrade an explorer there. This will be most of the time, needless to say, but it is worth pointing out that if you don't have a land with an explorer on your board, you will actually skip this ability. So that does come into play, but you know, it's not that often, but it does come up, and I have seen this come up. So you get to upgrade, you have to upgrade an explorer there, and again, this is that kind of increasing by 1 we talked about earlier on with the sort of the cascade, the sort of cascade replacement made an upgrade. We now have another upgrade here, but in this case it's only upgrade an explorer. Okay, now that's our Mining Boom 1. Now we go to level 4, and it's called Untapped Salt Deposits, and this is, for me, the essence of this adversary. This is the iconic thing, and it's the Salt Deposits card. So this is again a setup thing, and it's going to be setup. Remove the stage 2 coastal lands card before randomly choosing stage 2 cards. So we've no coastal lands in this game. So this is like the opposite of Scotland, essentially, which always has the coastal lands in the game. Now we're never going to have the coastal lands in the game, so that's gone. Okay, what else do? We place this Salt Deposits card in place of the second stage 2 card. And I should have gotten my Salt Deposits. I have it over here. I should have had it ready to go, and I do. So we're going to have this Salt Deposits card is going to be essentially in place of the second stage 2 card. So the new deck order is going to look like this. 1, 1, 1, 2, Salt, 2, 2. And then your 5 3s at the end. So instead of 4 2s in the middle, you've now got a 2, Salt, 2, 2. So Salt is going to be essentially the 5th card that explores. Now, what is the Salt Deposits card, I hear you ask? Well, let's talk about it. So here it is. I'm going to hold it up to the screen here. And obviously I'll bring this up on the screen because that's got a horrible glare on it. Salt Deposits works like this. A little bit funky, a little bit tricky. So when this card turns over, it's gonna be treated like a regular land for the first few turns at least, and it's gonna say, while this is in the explore or the build space, it affects non-mining lands. So again, here's this mining land thing that we talked about before. So it's now coming up again. So when I flip this card over, first it's in the explore step. What do? I look at every land on the board that's a non-mining land and I explore there. Now, again, let's remind ourselves a mining land is a land with 3 invaders. So essentially, I look all over the island right now with this and I check every land that doesn't contain 3 or more invaders, so essentially 2 or less. I'm now going to explore into all of those lands. So that's what it does. That's your explore. Then, of course, it shifts over and it goes in the build space. And then essentially, I do the same thing. I go, and when I'm building with this card, I look all over the board and I check every land that does not contain 3 or more invaders. Again, 2 or less invaders. If you have 2 or less invaders in the land, it will build. And importantly here, this is... it's an actual build, right? This isn't a ravage. So this is an actual build and it's going to build in those lands. And of course it's an actual build because they're not mining lands and you only have that other fancy rule when you're in a mining land. So these are non-mining lands, so they will do a regular build action. And again, that's every land on the board. Any land that qualifies for this 2 or less condition will build as part of this. So that's your explore and that's your build done. Then you shift over and you go into your ravage space, and now this is when things start to get a little bit spicy. So the card is actually broken down. It's got a kind of a top and a bottom thing. So the top thing is what we just talked about, which is the explore and the build. Then when it gets to the ravage, now when I hit this land as part of the ravage step, I'm now going to do similar thing to before. I'm going to check everywhere, but now I'm searching for mining lands. So whereas before in the explore and the build, we were looking at non-mining lands, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at mining lands. And every mining land on the board will qualify for the ravage. They all match and they all ravage. And that is how this card works. So it goes explore, check non-mining lands. Build, check non-mining lands. Ravage, check mining lands. And clearly here, you can probably start to sense it if you don't know this adversary already. You go ahead and you start exploring into the lands without enough invaders, then you build in them, and then usually that's going to put you up in many cases to the threshold of the 3 invaders, and then it's going to qualify for the ravage, and it's going to ravage everywhere. Oh, and by the way, the last piece of text on this card, in case that wasn't enough already, the last piece of text on the card says, do not advance this card. Yeah, it's not going away. That is going to sit there in the ravage step for the rest of the game. You can't get rid of it. Which is really something. And the first time I read this and the first time I started to get used to this, I was like, what? That is going to sit and it is going to do that effect every turn for the rest of the game. And of course, the rest of your invader cards that are coming behind this in the invader deck, they're all going to keep going. They're going to keep coming. They're going to keep going through and passing through the explore, the build, and the ravage step. So after essentially the first time this ravages, you're then usually going to have 2 ravage cards every turn. This plus whatever is coming behind it in the pipeline. And it can create a lot of very painful ravages, needless to say. So that's going to be your salt deposits card. That's your salt. That's your, people call this adversary Salzburg, and clearly this is the reason why. It's iconic. It can be very, very painful, and we need to do something about it. But thankfully, as I say, we have tricks up our sleeve, which we'll get to later on. So that's your level 4. Level 5 is going to be your Mining Boom 2. So this is, again, we talked about Mining Boom 1 before. Now we've got Mining Boom 2. And this is essentially going to replace Mining Boom 1. So instead of Mining Boom 1, after the build step, on each board, choose a land with explorers, builds there, then upgrade an explorer. So what does this mean? Before, we just did the choose a land with explorers and then upgrade an explorer. Now we're doing the same thing. We're choosing a land with explorers, but now we build there and then we upgrade the explorer. And it does say in parentheses here as well, build normally in a mining land. So if you choose a land that has 3 or more invaders for this particular action, this is going to do a regular build because it's not in the build step, right? We've seen in level 1 that's talking about specifically when the build card is in the build step. This isn't the case. This is a different thing. So this will do a normal build. And this is kind of So this is essentially the way that the adversary doesn't fall behind, right? Because clearly here, as part of level 1, they're doing extra ravages, right? If you hit the land, if the card comes out and it goes into the build slot, and then you've got that kind of mining land thing going on, it's ravaging, but it's not building. So they need a way to essentially make sure that with all the extra ravages, it also keeps up on its builds as well, of course, because it can't fall behind on those, because this is Habsburg Mining Expedition, and these are difficulty 10, so you can't be falling behind on your builds. So here you are here, and it's doing that extra kind of building, which it's kind of doing almost 2 builds, right? It's doing a build and then it's doing the upgrade, which is something similar to 2 builds in a sense. It's 1.5 at least, I would say. So that's how the Mining Boom 2 works. Again, it's the same timing, it's after the build step, all that kind of stuff. And then finally, we're going to get to level 6, and it's going to be called the Empire Ascendant. And this is set up and during the Explore step. So importantly, this happens as part of the setup, and then every turn it's going to happen during the Explore step. It says, on boards with 3 or fewer blight, add 1 Explore in each land successfully explored. Okay, so we're getting a little bit French here, are we, Habsburg? We're getting a little bit of influence from the French, are we? So yeah, on boards with 3 or fewer blight, which we're hoping to have, in an ideal game of Spirit Island, we don't want more than 3 blight on our board if we can help it. So our punishment for keeping the board clear is that every Explore action, during the Explore step, not every Explore action, it's important to mention here, this is only during the Explore step, very specifically, it is going to add 1 Explore in each land successfully explored. However, it does say in parentheses here, this is max 2 lands per board per Explore card. So number of things to break down here. I'll quickly break down, I'll work backwards, right? So the max 2 lands per board per Explore card, for your stage 1 and your stage 2 cards, that's only going to be 2 lands, right? It's going to be one terrain, 2 lands, both of them take an extra Explore. Fairly straightforward. We don't have a coastal card, so we don't have to worry about that. So, but when we get into the stage 3 cards then, which have of course 2 terrain types, this will only add in 2 of the 4 lands essentially. And then, of course, the other outlier here is going to be the mining, the salt deposits card. So if you still have this qualification criteria, when the salt deposits card hits, it's only going to do it in 2 lands per board per Explore card, which is something. It's not great, I'll tell you that, but it's something. So 2 lands per board. So that's kind of how all that works. In terms of the extra things, clearly here we see this sort of threshold of 3 or fewer blight. This is quite similar, or at least it's a throwback to the other Habsburg, which I'm not getting into now, but they also have a kind of a blight threshold kind of mechanic going on as well. So no surprise to see that there's a bit of a kind of a thematic sort of link with what they're doing. And I did actually coincidentally hear this week, I was listening back to an interview that Eric Royce and Ted Vesines did with John from the Kindred Spirit podcast about a year or 2 ago, not long after Nature Incarnate was released, and they were talking about trying to balance HME and design HME, and for a very long time apparently they had the same durable mechanic that Habsburg Livestock had. Again, I'm not getting into what it means here, but for a lot of people they'll be familiar with that. Apparently they had durable on HME for a very long time as part of the as part of their design, and it started off at level 1 and then it went to level 2, 3, 4. They kept pushing it up the levels because it's such an obnoxious mechanic, and eventually they just deleted it off it because it's something they said, I can't believe we were thinking about printing it again. It's obnoxious. So not sure why I mentioned that here, given that I'm not actually explaining what durable means. I suppose I should probably do that. Durable is a mechanic on Habsburg that makes their towns very difficult to kill unless they're in lands with blight. So again, there's a blight kind of link. that the two adversaries have. But that's kind of, again, the reason I'm bringing that up, of course, is it gives us a bit of an interplay. So we knew that from before. Again, I say before, Habsburg livestock came before mining expedition, but we were used to having this idea of playing around lands with blight. The durable mechanic I just mentioned, we need to think about which lands have blight in them, and now we need to do it again. So we're really thinking here, how many lands are on the board that have blight, and will it turn off or on, essentially, this level 6 ability. So once you kind of reach it and you hit your threshold of 4 blight, essentially, so it's 3 or fewer, it's in, 4, it's out. So once you hit 4 blight per board, you turn off this ability for good, essentially, unless of course you remove the blight again, which I don't recommend doing, and that's going to be all of that. So that is our 6 levels. I'll stop for a bit of a drink because I'm parched. Yeah. It's not a great beer, I'm not going to lie. A very metallic taste of that beer. It's a hazy IPA, which can be hit or miss. I was big into them for a while, the hazy IPAs, drinking all sorts of big triples and quadruple IPAs, 13-14%, crazy, hazy, fruity, thick, all sorts of madness beers. I was into all of them for a while, but I don't know what was wrong with me, because those things are ridiculous to drink. It's like drinking wine in beer form. It doesn't translate all that well. But anyway, let's not get too bogged down on that. It's beer at the very least. Speaking of beer, the flavour of this, or speaking of flavour, should I say, the flavour of HME is something I just wanted to quickly check in on here before we left, because it's not something I've really done on any of the other adversaries, and I wanted to kind of stop and give a little bit of a shout out to how well this is kind of put together. And I never really thought about this until today, when I stopped and I really thought about the kind of the levels and what they're called and how they function. So similarly to the to my elements episode, and if you haven't listened to that, please do go back and listen to the elements episode, and I'll do the little bit of a floaty thing here that you could maybe go off and bookmark that one for later, because I really enjoyed that episode. But in that episode, I talked about how I never appreciated the impact and the role that elements had to play in the game until I did my episode and I really dug into it. And very similarly here, I never appreciated quite how much goes into the lore and the storytelling from just this panel alone. I know the book also has a little bit that you can read about too. But if you think about the translation of thematic to mechanic from the actual adversary card here, there's a lot of really nice things going on. So the first thing is actually that triggered this. I was watching another little throwback thing here that I'm going to mention, an interview done of Eric Royce in 2014, I think it was like the year before Spirit Island got published. And he was at one of these big game cons, Greater Than Games or BGG. It was a BGG thing or some big game con anyway. And he was being interviewed with the kind of prototype version of Spirit Island on the table, and it's really cool. If anyone's listening here, go and check this out. So I think I got the link through. Eric has a website. He's got like a ericrice.com or something like that, and in there he's got a link to basically all of his interviews that have been kind of published out there in the World Wide Web, so to speak. And there's a video of him, much younger, fresh faced, talking through his new game, and it's got all kind of basically just print out kind of on white paper with no art or anything like that version of the game. So it's really cool to see. And he said like it's just about to go to publishing, it's in print and all that with Greater Than Games at the time. So it is very much sort of the final version of the game, but you can see what it looked like with his old little components of things on the board and all that kind of stuff. So it's really, really cool. But anyway, in that he talks about a very basic thing around what ravaging is, and he's explaining this obviously to the interviewer who knows nothing about the game, and it's almost like a sales pitch, I guess, to listeners, and he talks about what ravaging means thematically in real life, and it almost made me sort of second guess or do a little double take kind of, because for me, up until that moment, I always just thought about Ravage as, you know, you explore. Essentially, an explorer just arrives. He comes into the jungle or something like that from the local town, goes into the jungle, goes, hey, this is a pretty cool place. Why don't I, you know, bring some more people along with me and we'll set up camp here and we'll see what's going on, which is your kind of explore to build phase, let's say, as part of the invader cycle. And then eventually, you know, after they've built up there, they then go ahead and they ravage. And in my mind, the ravaging was just, they go ahead and they attack the people, they attack the spirits, they attack the you know, the natives of the land, and they go on the offensive. In my mind, that was always, ravage means go on the offensive. And you know, if they go on the offensive and they do enough offense to the land, they blight the land, which for me, in my mind, it was always like almost you know, they set fire, right? They go and they burn down the local towns, or they, you know, they wreck the place, they destroy the place, whatever, that kind of thing. And you know, a blight cascade in my mind was almost like a wildfire where they burned down this and then it went into the neighboring land and maybe some of those buildings burned down. So I kind of had that in my mind as the ravage equals offense thing. And you know, hearing him talk about it, he's kind of like, well, it's not really, it's a bit of that, of course, but then it's also like going and like, you know, stripping the land of whatever is there. It's like, you know, going and maybe mining, for example, the land, or stealing the crops, or doing whatever to kind of ravage the land in different ways that isn't just going and attacking the locals, essentially. And hearing that, I was preparing for the HME episode, and I kind of twigged a little bit in me about, oh yeah, that's quite interesting actually. And then I come back and I look at this, and it makes so much more sense that Habsburg mining expedition aren't an aggressive nation in the same way that many of the others would be, like for example maybe Brandenburg Prussia or Sweden, for example, who they, you know, the fine steel for tools and guns, very much about offense. Here, we're very much talking about mining, and it's ravaging the land in a different way. It's exploiting the land. It's taking, it's a greedy sort of grab for anything that they can find in the land. Most likely here, I guess, if they're mining for diamonds or gold or whatever else it is. But all of this aggression that we see in the form of early ravages, it's not aggression from a sort of a war standpoint or a physical, you know, sort of attack standpoint. It's a ravage the land and take what we can in a massively greedy way. And that was a really cool moment for me to really understand that that's how this adversary works. You know, all of what they have written here, land stripped bare. It's written in plain English. It couldn't be more obvious really when you look at it, but when I was going through, I just never really twigged that. I never really appreciated what that meant. You know, the land stripped bare, of course, it's you need the stripping everything from the land. You've got mining tunnels in this case, so they're like building tunnels, you know, through the mines that they're creating, and the mining tunnels are giving you that idea of you don't need a source to be able to explore across the different parts of the island, which is really cool. You've got avarice rewarded, which is like their greed is being rewarded because now, as part of the mining that they're doing, you know, when there is an aggression in there, it's like, or when they ravage more and more and they dig and they dig and they dig, it's like their greed gets rewarded and they become stronger as a result of it. So again, it's not an aggression from a physical kind of war point stand. It's that kind of digging and mining thing. And of course, ceaseless mining, again, it's written in plain English. So you've got all this kind of stuff here, and it's really, you know, it's really a massively fast spread. It's got that speed up front that some of the other adversaries have, but as I say, in a different way, and there's a very much a different flavour around it, which went massively over my head for the last year that I've had this content, or however long it's been since I bought Nature Incarnate. So I'm glad I spotted that eventually, and for anyone who's listening who maybe hadn't spotted that the same way I didn't, perhaps now you may gain a slight more appreciation for that particular piece of content that you have. So that is all of that. It is now almost 49 minutes into the episode, and I have just finished reading the adversary panel, which does not bode well for the time that I'm going to bed. this evening, so I should probably keep this rolling quite a bit. So we've got community interaction coming up. Again, really, really good inputs here. We have a mixed bag, in truth, actually. I saw probably more dislike in this episode than I have in any of the previous ones, which I found quite interesting. I personally do quite like Habsburg Mining Expedition as an adversary. They are a little bit fiddly. There are some little quirks and different things that go on with them, which are, somewhat fiddly, and you really need to keep an eye on. But I enjoy the game. Not everybody does, and we're going to start out with some comments from people who quite dislike HME. So we'll start with this, and we've got Symphony 7 here comes in, and this was a really, really upvoted comment from Symphony. So I'm starting right here because this was the most popular comment actually on the thread. And Symphony says, I'll have to be just a bit of a downer here and say HME is the only adversary I don't really like. So even though the new has worn off, I still find myself needing to recheck their rules several times per game. And I feel like their design plays a big part in this. I find them to be overly fiddly. They mess with the core gameplay too much, and it makes me constantly second guess my decisions and question if I'm forgetting an effect they have or misplaying a rule. So sometimes builds are ravages, sometimes builds are builds. Cascades are upgrades. Sometimes disease affects builds, sometimes disease affects ravages. This turn we care which lands aren't mining, that turn we care which lands are mining. Oh crap, I forgot to account for a random piece getting upgraded. Whoops, I just noticed that land is a lost condition. Time to scrap all my plans for the 4th time this turn. It feels mentally tiring to me. So they go on and say HME just ends up feeling like a pile of rules that throw out how Spirit Island plays, and they don't come together into a cohesive adversary with a strong team that their rules flow from. The other adversaries feel like they attack you in flavorful ways, where every level builds on the identity of the adversary, but I just don't think HME ever does that. And they say, I still end up playing them when I'm with my group, and I still have fun because it's Spirit Island, but when I'm solo, this one always stays in the box. So, first of all, I'm not sure if you all heard my baby crying from the other room, which started about halfway through that, and it threw me off while I was trying to read out the comments. So I hope I didn't accidentally get some of the words or parts of that mixed up there. But I believe he's stopped crying now, which is good. But other than that, look, I can't disagree too much with what's being said here. In truth, there is a lot of fiddly things, and there's a lot of odd change the game type effects that happen, and I do understand this thing of having to second guess what you're doing and question, what did that do again? Go back and does the disease work in is it in this particular step, or is it this particular action, or so there's a lot of that going on, and that is just kind of what it is. Especially when I got this box first, it took me a while to really figure out what was happening with this adversary. So I will not disagree, and I won't fight too hard on this one, to be honest, Symphony. I will say that I enjoy it, but I absolutely do appreciate what's being said here. And yeah, it kind of just is what it is. So up next, we have Haunting Pineapple 71. They say, personally, my least favourite adversary by a good margin. The majority of the better players in the Spirit Island Discord agree with this sentiment as well. And they give 4 examples here of why that's the case. So they say, double explorers being turned off by 4+ blight just means you're highly incentivized to take a lot of blight and go blighted early. This adversary also basically kills control strategies with 2 explorers before then, at least ones that rely on push gather 1. It also makes defend strategies way too good, which is just generally not very fun when defend is already good enough with other adversaries. And finally, then the 4th thing they say is mining boom plus the ravaging during the build step also promotes a lot of unnecessary RNG, as sometimes you have to pick between 2 lands to mining boom, and if either explores, you just get a free blight next build phase, which is never fun to deal with. So some of this I agree with and some of it I don't, in truth. So let's kind of break this down a little bit here. So double explorers being turned off by the 4+ blight. So this is the HME6 rule, right? So this essentially what we talked about, you can turn it off by hitting the 4 blight. It means you're highly incentivized to take a lot of blight and go blighted early. I don't think that's a bad idea, and I don't agree that that's a problem. Clearly here Haunting Pineapple saying that that's one of the reasons they don't like it. And you know, I can again appreciate the sentiment that a lot of the quote unquote better players, I've seen them a lot of the time myself. Now I'm talking, I've seen a lot of sort of judgment on how good a thing is in the game, and this is kind of getting into meta talk now, like what's good, what isn't, what's good versus this, and so on. A lot of that kind of talk tends to center around how few blight that particular spirit takes in that particular matchup. Oh, X is good into Y because it only takes 2 blight, or it only takes 1 blight, or so on. So a lot of the time that conversation is around how much blight they take, and clearly here, if that's the case, and the players are very much in the mindset of the least blight the better, which by the way is a completely accurate mindset to have. Of course, less blight equals better, but for me that's not enough to say that this is a problem. You know, just because it, you know, generally speaking, it's good best practice to not have blight and not flip the blight card. I don't think that's enough to say, well, okay, now we've got an adversary that forces you to flip the blight card. That's bad. You know, so I don't get this quite a bit. For me, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. You know, having something that sort of kicks the norm a little bit and sort of, you know, bucks the trend, it gives you something new to think about. Now, I will say that with this particular rule, maybe a sort of a criticism that you could aim at this rule is that it's maybe a slightly blunt instrument. You know, the means by which you turn it off is maybe a little bit simple or something, you know. Okay, I'll just blindly take 3 blight and then it's off type of thing, you know. Maybe that could be a criticism. That's not what Pineapple is saying here, but that could be maybe something that someone else might say. So it could be that maybe the design of it is just a bit plain, and then maybe that's part of the thing. But for me anyway, I don't see that as a problem. So second up, they say that the adversary kills controlled strategies with 2 explorers before then. So before obviously you turn the HME6 off, you're getting the double explorer. I don't quite agree with this. I sort of understand it. Again, let's take Shadows as an example. So Shadows is a spirit that very much works well into single explorers. Once you start hitting double explorers, it becomes much more difficult to Shadows to control a land and to solve a land, right? Solve it, to stop it building. And that is true. Sure, of course it is, right? So having 2 explorers is much worse than 1, and there's a whole bunch of other effects in the game that work better against 1 explorer than 2. And Breath is a good example where it likes to jump around and pick off single invaders, but if you now have multiple invaders, that makes Breath's job harder. So that type of thing is fair and accurate, but I still don't think it kills those strategies. And the reason I don't think that is those abilities, those single ping and single, you know, invader abilities are still highly relevant into this adversary as the game goes along. And we're going to talk about that later on, why that is the case. So again, here, not so sure. I do agree with them saying making defense strategies they're already way too good, so making them better is generally not great. I do understand that, and defend is very good into this adversary, so that's a fair point. And then the last bit here about kind of mining boom promoting a lot of unnecessary RNG, for me that's just the game. There's going to be RNG in the game, and without RNG, I think you lose a lot in a game. Like, events add RNG. RNG, by the way, is random number generator for anyone who's not familiar with the term. So they're essentially saying here that it promotes a lot of unnecessary randomness in the game. Again, you have to have randomness, right? You know, you pick one versus the other. They're saying if you pick wrong, it's a problem, you know. But if you have too much sort of deterministic gameplay within a game, I tend to get a little bit disinterested. So I like RNG, and for me that's not really a problem either. But some stuff in there, as I said, that I do agree with as well. But we'll keep moving. Versalius then, it's interesting for the first 5 times, but then games become very samey. So take Blight to scale, burst tempo on the Salt card, and prioritize double ravaged lands. This generally results in a very fast board clear, turn 6 to 7 for most spirits, but then sometimes you randomly get screwed over by intensifying exploitation, which is a Blight card that does +2 damage per ravage action. So yeah, I mean, I could see that being a little bit tough with HME, alright, but I think frequency of ravage is more problematic with HME than the amount they're ravaging for. And again, we'll get into that later on. So not much replay value, and it's a mixed bag in doubles. Quite toxic with Sweden, Russia, but it's anti-synergy with France. Overall, my enjoyment of HME has decreased over time, especially because most of the people I play with hate HME. So perhaps Vesalius, you're part of that group that Pineapple was talking about on the previous comment there. So clearly not too enamored by all of that, Vesalius. And look, again, the criticism about them being a bit samey, I can hear that, and we will again get into the patterns of how to play against HME later, and I do appreciate the fact that yes, the patterns are quite repetitive. I like them. I've clearly played less HME than all the rest of the adversaries, so for me it's still not gone stale, but I understand kind of the point you're making here. And by the way, the comment here about the doubles, I'm not sure if this comes up again. HME are horrific in doubles. Absolutely awful. Playing these in 6/6s, they're extremely challenging. Certainly one of the hardest of the entire 8 for sure. Now, Guzman as a gamer then comes in and says, I'm just working my way through all levels, 6 levels for the first time. Currently just got absolutely steamrolled by level 6 in my first attempt. And Guzman goes on to say, I don't like them at all. Too fiddly, too many rules or changes in behaviour to track. Salt mines just feels bad. Doubt I'll revisit them much. That said, I'm glad they exist for those that like the challenge. Yeah, look, Guzman, I mean, I can't again sort of discredit your feelings in this situation. Clearly this is a very personal sort of thing that Guzman has come in with here, so a little bit less on the rules X or Y, this is why I don't like them. It's a bit more, my experience is X and therefore Y. So clearly here, salt mines just feels bad. That type of comment is like, okay, well look, if you feel bad about it, that's totally understandable. I would say in terms of getting absolutely steamrolled against level 6, there's a lot of interplay with level 6 and with almost all the levels. So clearly here, Guzman, I know you listen to the show, so you'll probably end up listening through to this, and you'll probably go through and kind of hear the rest of the episode around sort of how to go about doing that. I would recommend sort of trying to pick some of those things out and go back and revisit them enough to kind of quote unquote get it. Like, I know you play other level 6s, so that's the level you play at, so you're able for that. So, you know, I think you're well able to go ahead and actually sort of get the tricks and figure it out, so to speak, and then go ahead and get some wins under your belt. Whether that improves your opinion of them and your experience of them, that's a whole other story. But I would certainly, you know, encourage to kind of go back, and I know you're a big lover of Breath of Darkness, of which other people in the show have said it's a troublesome matchup. So, you know, maybe a couple of other different spirits and kind of go back and see if you can pick up the old W. But do of course, Guzman, come back and let us know whether you manage to pick up the win. I'll be listening out and watching out keenly for that one. So up next then we've got Taste the Rainbow. They say, we've been making our way through all level 6 adversaries with 2 players. Last night we finally beat Russia. Congratulations, Taste the Rainbow, well done. Russia are absolutely horrendous, and I remember my first win against Russia quite well. So HME is the only one we choose to skip and come back. It's the short length of the game that makes HME so annoying. You have very few choices because it's just over so fast. I still like it. It's very unique, but it can be so frustrating. One bad card game or event can derail you. Some of this I agree and some I disagree. So short length of the game, yes, I absolutely agree. HME for me is actually the shortest game of the 8. A lot of people will say BP is the kind of short game, but actually, as we heard during that episode, I'm not sure that's quite as true as people might sort of have in the backs of their head. For me, the shortest number of turns on average will be HME. I think this is an adversary, and we already had someone talk about it being a kind of a 6 to 7 kind of thing. We'll talk a little bit later on about how my playthrough went against them, but suffice to say, I do definitely think that these are the shortest of the 8. However, they say you have very few choices because it's just over so fast. That's the bit I disagree with. I think you've a lot of choices against HME, and whether that's for good or for bad is something we'll talk about later on. But I think you have a lot of choices within those short amount of turns, and you know, again, maybe that's something that is a bit like with the previous comment with Guzman. I don't want to try to sort of discredit your own feelings and experiences here because they're yours. But you know, whether if that's something that you can maybe look at and think, oh, actually, maybe there is more choice there than I maybe thought at first, and whether that changes the experience for you or not is a different story. But do encourage kind of listening in and checking out the old you know, tactics and strategy section later on, Taste the Rainbow. Maybe that gives one or two ideas. Next up we have Blacker Spork. Then a bit too much to keep track of, but the new take on the loss condition is healthier than previous adversaries. So first person to mention this, and strange that it's Habsburg again instead of another nation, which is the only person who mentioned it, which I obviously talked about already, so I won't go into again. But yeah, strange is certainly the word I would use. Finally, then, I think in the negative section we have Dapper Apples, who says remembering mining lands takes too much brain. Fair enough, Dapper Apples, fair enough. So that's all the kind of negative stuff. I wanted to get that out of the way up front because, as I say, I like HME and I wanted that out of the way and I wanted it done. Now we've got a little bit of a mixed bag, so people are kind of maybe not too strongly in one direction or another, but they have some comments all the same. So Noradrenaline comes back in and says they are weird, which makes sense. As a later addition to the adversary roster, they are going to have to venture further afield than earlier adversaries in order to bring something new to the table. I love Nora's inputs. Nora always has interesting things to say here. So they have quite a distinctive gameplay pattern. They start out relatively slow, at least at level 5 and below, but then punish you for punishing their initial slowness. So I find it emotionally difficult to let them build up during the early game. All my instincts are saying to push tempo and clear lands while I can. And they say I feel similarly about Russia, who punish you for pushing the fear deck, which is true, and we'll talk about Russia when we get to those. Then there's this crucial middle phase of the game, from when the Salt card explores through its first solo Ravage, where the game you're playing is all about controlling what lands are mining lands. Then it seems like the rest of the game is either easy street or hard boulevard, depending on how you did with the Salt minigame. Hard boulevard, I love that. The whole mining lands salt deposit behavior was incredibly confusing to me when I read the adversary during the rules during the Kickstarter period. However, once I got it to the table and worked through it a few times, it wasn't that bad. I find myself much more likely to forget about the Cascade rule or the mining boom than to get confused about what's a mining land or what the salt deposit is doing this turn. So huge amount for me to agree with here. Yeah, when I read this the first time I played HME, I was just like, I think I wrote in one of the comments, my brain was like the tumbleweed. I had no clue what was going on. I was like reading the words and I'm like, this is English, but I have no clue what this is saying. I'm like Googling the whole thing. I was like reading the whole quirky, just trying to get an understanding about what the hell is actually happening here. Now in hindsight, when I look at it, it's like, it seems straightforward. You know, I read it during this part of this episode, and when I'm reading it, the panel, it looks like it makes sense. But when at the start, like I had nobody to teach me that or anything like that. I was just reading it straight out of the box. I was like total and utter just brain just melt. It was just like no clue. So I don't know why that was necessarily, but clearly here, as Nora is saying, once you get it, and it's fine, and it's not really that confusing once you understand how it works. But that initial sort of barrier to entry is quite high, I would say. One or two other things here. I think them starting it relatively slowly, I thought was quite an interesting take here. They say at least level 5 and below, so clearly yes, level 6 gives them that extra kick, which is the double explorers, and that really does push their aggression a lot, because it gives you much more mining lands early. But again, yeah, I'm not sure I'd call HME slow as such, but very, very much agree with all of this kind of stuff about the crucial middle phase where the kind of salt explores through to the ravage, and whether or not that goes well kind of determines the whole rest of your game. All absolutely strongly agree. Up next then, it's BST 1994. I find the rules fiddly and hard to remember, but not unenjoyably so. Them not being on digital and not being a top pick on the Discord server make them a spicy adversary that gives interesting matchups, even with spirits I'm familiar with. So yeah, that's a nice comment there. And again, they're picking up on the Discord stuff like Pineapple earlier on in the episode. Up next then, Social Justice Cleric 7 says, kinda mixed feelings. Not my favourite adversary, but it does succeed at providing variety. In particular, it creates a large number of small problems rather than a small number of very big problems. This means that major powers that absolutely hammer one land are relatively less useful, and power cards that cover many lands are more useful. And I do strongly agree with that. Now, next we have then Metkitar. I enjoy them because they feel like a much easier adversary than they initially look. I don't enjoy them when I'm playing a more complex spirit, however, because invader upkeep is usually left to me. I play 2 to 5 person games most of the time, and I don't have the bandwidth to manage all their discrete little actions and a complicated spirit without slowing the game down for all the other players. And that makes a huge amount of sense. If you're the only one, if you're the kind of banker, let's say, and you're managing all the things and putting the invaders out and all that kind of stuff, I could certainly see that being far too much. So that's your kind of your middle of the road, not really plus, not really minus, a little bit of both kind of stuff. Up next, we're going to have the people who very much like HME, of which there are quite a few. So we've got Memesed says they've got 4 likes here and 1 dislike. So it changes the core gameplay mechanic, but in a way that doesn't feel unfair or unfun. So you've got the ability to manipulate the mining lands quite easily, which means you rarely get gigantic pile-ups like you do into England. And blighting out is a fair bit harder to do also, which we talked about at the start of the episode because of the kind of upgrade instead of the cascades. Now, they say there's a fair loss condition and there's much less chance of getting screwed by an event or something because you kind of almost always see it coming. It does, of course, require resources, but it feels manageable. And clearly here, there's a big difference between, as we said, something happening automatically when it fulfills a condition as opposed to happening at the end of the fast phase. And good predictability and difficulty curve then is their third thing. So they say, I know that the top Spirit Island players find HME too easy because by turn 4 or 5 when Salt Deposit shows up, you've normally won the game or are on the path to it. But I really enjoy the predictable spike of focus that you need, and I don't feel like I have the game solved by turn 4 or 5. So going into a HME game, I know I will need to prepare and plan for the Salt card, and it makes that kind of whole mini game, let's say, feel very engaging because you kind of can manipulate and affect which lands are and aren't going to be a problem. And finally, they say the last thing they like is the disease utility. So this is perhaps controversial, but I personally really enjoy the added utility offered by disease. Yes, you prevent less builds, but you can use it to stop ravages, which feels very nice. And I can see how for certain disease spirits, i.e. vengeance, this would make their game plan more difficult, but it also means disease has more uses. And the final thing they say is that they dislike the tracking changes. And they say, I know others have commented on this, but it does require you to mentally keep track of a lot of different variables with all the various rules, and I could see how in larger games this could quickly get overwhelming. So yeah, memes with a lot of things that, calling out some really nice things about the adversary there. They did say about the disease utility. I think not many players kind of offered an opinion on this one, and I do personally really like the extra kind of flavor for diseases. I don't use disease cards all that much in truth. When I play Spirit Island, disease tends to be one cost or more, a slightly expensive mechanic. I find it a little underpowered. It's fine, and certainly you'll use it. And I love Vengeance. Vengeance is an amazingly fun spirit to play, so I love playing with Vengeance. So when I play with them, clearly I love it. But yeah, it's just one of them things, really. It's really powerful in the right spot. I love when I get it for free on events and things like that, but I don't tend to draft cards that play disease all that much. So I like that HME gives me another sort of reason to want to use disease, which is quite cool. Bwen then comes in and says, it's a favourite of mine. So other comments in here have legitimate gripes with its fiddliness, but I really enjoy it. So the salt card will hit you hard during explore and build if you've pushed aggressively, which combined with HME6 can lead to a more hands-off and ramp style, which is one of the most fun ways to play. HME6 is a brutal capstone and worth more than 1 point of difficulty in my opinion. I actually have the lowest win rate on HME6 compared to any other level 6 adversary, including England and Russia, which I found very interesting. They have better win rates against England and Russia than HME, at level 6 of course. I used to hate HME6 and would often do HME4 plus an extra board or HME5 plus an extra board, but it has grown on me. And they say there's a lot of evidence of learning from previous expansions, such as checking the defeat condition at the end of the fast phase, giving you maximum time to react and things like that. So they say England, France and perhaps Scotland could learn a thing or two from this design if ever a Spirit Island 2nd edition did come to fruition. And they say, all in all, a weird adversary, but a fun one and satisfying to beat. I feel as though HME games tend to expand the decision space a lot, making them feel brain-burny and good play feel even more satisfying. And I do agree with that very much so in the last section there. There is a lot to think about, but I do personally find it very satisfying as well. Up next then, Justin Vamp says, probably my favourite adversary as well, although England and Scotland are up there. There are so many ways to try and interact with their mechanics and they are very tough, but in a way that doesn't seem dumb, like the Russian Indestructo Explorers. Yeah, which is pretty dumb indeed. Damn well then, I love it. I like the idea that they have big advantages with some big disadvantages too. So they ravage extra, but disease is even more powerful because it can stop it. They blight easier with all the ravages, but they can't cascade. They can't actually build up big lands because some of their builds end up as ravages. Something just fell on me there, hope that wasn't important, no idea what that was. They can't actually build up big lands because some of their builds ends up as ravages, as they say, and then they have lots of elements to turn to your advantage. All relevant points here, and a lot of the reasons why you can interact with them, and there's a lot of player agency, as we've talked about already. Next up is Brouhaha for their very first comment, if I'm not mistaken, on this channel. And you just know, being such a fan of the Kindred Spirit podcast as I am, that I am contractually obliged to try out the old Brouhaha. Oh, I hope people listening will know what I'm talking about there. So Bruchech, I love them because while mining lands present a set of problems, they also offer a lot of ways to interact with them that make a wide variety of approaches useful. Got defense? Well, now they're ravaging instead of building. Got gather push / damage? Well, now you can turn mining lands into non-mining lands with that. And the utility of disease goes way up, and given the threat, it's nice that cascades behave differently. So many adversaries make a spirit shtick much less useful or even useless, whereas HME has many ways to counterplay that every spirit is useful. So yeah, absolutely agree. There is kind of something for everybody to be able to interact. Thank you, Brouhaha. I won't do that again on any future episodes, but as I say, I had to try it once. Speaking of interesting usernames here, our good friend, I'm going to hopefully pronounce this correctly this time, Chetverty Maggie123 has come back and said, my favorite adversary alongside Scotland. They're basically the most unique, that they're not focused on specific pieces like many other adversaries, and unlike Prussia, Sweden and Scotland, it's much different than the base game. So the mining lands open up a lot of plays that wouldn't be possible against other adversaries, because you can force ravage to happen instead of build. And that's interesting. You can force ravage to happen instead of build, but you also need to be able to deal with multiple small problems at once. So I really like there that they're saying that not only does sometimes it happen and sometimes not, you can actually force it to happen. And that's an interesting interplay no one else I think brought up. Mining Boom gives player choice, which I love, and again opens up some interesting strategies. I also find level 6 rule to be very fun to play around. You can either let invaders blight a bit to prevent additional explorers, but risk with a blighted island effect, or just keep up with more explorers. So again, they're talking about that HME6 thing, and again, I talked about it already. I do really like it as well. So they're backing me up. So Chetverty Maggie123, I butchered your name God knows how many times, but thank you for letting me know in the comments. That is of course a word from your native language, a Slavic language. I believe the word translates to fort, so Fort Maggie, something like that. So hopefully I got that a little bit more accurately than before, and apologies again for previous episodes. Up next then we have Catarash. I love Mining Boom. It's their biggest way to add plastic to the board, and contrary to the other adversaries, you get to choose where you're adding that. What about you building this dump land I want to nuke? Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that too. That's my strategy when I play against these for sure. Make the dump land, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. We are coming close to the end here. We have about, I think, 3 or 4 more comments that are related to the spirits now. So we have Inconsequentialis says, maybe my favorite adversary, which is funny because when I first played them, I was just so frustrated. But I feel more than many other adversaries, you can learn how they work, and then they just click, at least for me. So it goes like this. Turn off HME6, stack their lands, play around the salt deposits, have only 1 or 2 relevant lands left when it hits the ravage, drop the hammer on those lands, and then win the game. I'm not going to repeat that because I'm going to talk about it later on, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about later on is very similar to what you've just said there in Consequentialis, but yes, strong agree. And then they finally close out with, it helps that Wounded Waters Bleeding is my favourite spirit, and the matchup is amazing. It's not necessarily easy, but you have so many opportunities to get ahead a little bit, and I really enjoy piloting it. And that is for me a great comment, because I love to say I love matchups where it's not necessarily good or easy, but it's very interactive. And they've obviously found something they really like there. Beta Jin then coming back in with, I think it helps me get why some players may be inclined to dislike England in a meta sense. I tend to like England, but a lot of my favourite spirits perform fine against it, while some players' favourites struggle greatly with England's mechanics. In turn, a lot of the spirits that I like are frustrated by HME's mechanics, and I think that colours my feelings about the adversary. I ought to keep an open mind, but in my limited play time with them, it's been my least favourite adversary. And they did clarify what they meant with a few of the spirits here. So, for example, they talk about Fangs, saying you're strongly encouraged to take early blight, which is never a good thing with Fangs, of course, and having an inland city to start, it starts to cause issues, of course, as it does for many control spirits as well. And obviously they're talking about pocketing there as well as many other things, I'd imagine. They also mentioned then Whirlwind, so similar issues and similar solutions in terms of kind of drafting their way out of trouble to try find answers that aren't in the opening kit. And then they also mentioned Breath of Darkness, which I think 1 or 2 other commenters mentioned too. Saying, similar, but I didn't know a whole lot about the spirit at the time, so they may well go back and give them another try. Fotsalot then says, when I'm playing Vengeance, I obviously always choose to take the fear and horde disease rather than preventing actions, except against HME. I like how the matchup makes the choice of whether to use the terror of a slowly unfolding plague a real choice. So I didn't check it, but I'm assuming the terror of a slowly unfolding plague is that particular rule, and the special rule of vengeance, which allows you to use disease to kind of, or allow builds to go through instead of stopping them with disease. And then in this case, of course, the way HME works with the wording, it basically it sort of it changes the build prevention stuff into ravage prevention stuff. So with vengeance, in this case, you get the same choice essentially. So you can decide to stop the ravage or to let it through. I don't think I've ever played this matchup. It does sound like a lot of fun, and I would say in general, for me, vengeance is very much about just letting everything through and letting the board go to hell. And god damn it, let's get loads of blight out there. Let's throw my presence in the lands that are about to ravage. Take the blight, take the get the extra disease, and make the whole thing a big giant mess, which is so much fun. Up next, then we've got World Peace Bringer. Says, I enjoyed your 6-boom build versus HME, and there they were talking about my volcano guide, of course, and I really appreciate that, World Peace Bringer. And they mentioned here Stone, HV, Downpour, Lure, and obviously Vengeance have all been fun matchups for me versus HME 6. Spirits that can utilize some kind of reliable to hand movement with defend should work quite well. I'm yet to win with with Breath of Darkness because the matchup feels so bad. So yeah, there was the other comment about Breath of Darkness, and one or two other people were coming in the comments. I think Gooseman as a gamer was responding and saying, yeah, it was horrible. So that's fair. And then this is the final comment, I believe, is Symphony 7 is coming back in a second time in the comments, and they said they wanted to give a little bit around kind of not just the design but also kind of the play, and they've got a bunch of stuff about some spirits here as well. So they say, I feel like control is a little weaker than normal because the Salt's Deposit explore and build rubber band HME back a bit. There's that rubber banding term we heard about before, and that's that kind of bounce back ability stuff where if you deal with their stuff, they kind of have a way to come back at you, which is fair. If you have them well controlled, and the level 6 rule also buffs them a bit if you have them under control as well. So, rather than trying to fully control HME, I find that it's better to devote your early turns to scaling as hard as possible and letting them go a bit so you can prepare for the salt deposits. They say defends and ravage skips are fantastic in the HME to help you survive the big turn. I always try to keep an eye out on those when drafting. Now, they're about to go into the spirits here, but I'm going to stop and I'm going to comment slightly quickly on them. For me, defend, absolutely excellent in the HME. Ravage skips, not so much. I think ravage skips are at their worst against HME, and I'll talk about that later on. But I just wanted to mention it here because I'm obviously my opinion isn't the sole answer, or it's not the the quote unquote correct thing. So clearly here, some people do like ravage skips, and this was an example of somebody who does enjoy a ravage skip in the HME. But just wanted to point that out. After that, they say a few spirits that I find great in the HME. Vengeance is obvious. Again, somebody mentioned Vengeance. Angry Lizard doesn't mind letting them blight a lot, and easy access to tons of disease is very versatile with their special rule, which does make sense. They also come with a Ravage Skip and fantastic damage for blowing up lands that are getting close to the lost condition. So yeah, Vengeance with a Ravage Skip makes sense there. Stone is also obvious. If the goal is to survive a big dangerous turn, then the spirit with the most resilience and survivability in the game is an obvious choice. They say Serpent being able to defend 4 or more lands at once with Aegis is absolutely fantastic into the Salt Deposits turn, and that makes a huge amount of sense to me. Once you survive that turn and begin to unlock, you'll be able to easily sweep them away to a victory, so I can definitely see that making sense. Eyes packs so much defense in its kit that it can just block its way through the big turn, and there's enough fear in the kit to push towards a win fairly early afterwards, and that makes sense to me, huge amount. I think I mentioned Eyes again later on in the episode. They also mentioned Fangs here, so Fangs may not love how HME rewards blighting, but in terms of addressing the Salt's Deposits turn, having such a ridiculous cards play track is incredibly powerful. So when the adversary asks you to answer many lands at once, having the flexibility to affect so many places and having gotten to draft as many cards as Fangs does is extremely powerful. And lastly, Many Minds performs exceptionally well, I find. Action skips, multiple defends, excellent fear generation, mobility to get away from lands that will be blighting, and enough control to solve a land or two on the deposit's turn. Many Minds has it all. So huge thank you there, Symphony. That was a great way, I think, to end that all out. There was one other big comment that came in, and I just noticed it right before recording here, from Julian505. Thank you, Julian. I saw your comment, but it was literally 2 minutes before I started recording, so I had no way to go back and retrospectively fit it in. It was a big long comment. There was a huge amount of great stuff in it there. Please do, everybody, go and check out the old sort of how do you feel comment on the Reddits, which I'll obviously stick in the description below there, because I can't link it with the floaty things yet, but there's some really good stuff from Julian there, and from others which weren't of course mentioned on the episode. Julian talked about having a strategy in particular to combat this adversary, as opposed to a lot of tactical things. One overarching strategy is more important, and I do strongly agree with that for sure. Okay. that was something. That was a marathon of comments. Thank you everyone who commented. Thank you everyone whose comments I just read out. Everyone whose I didn't. People were in there. People were in the comments. People were creating threads. There was lots of conversation happening. It was all fantastic. Really, really big thank you to everybody who gets involved with this now and every week and all the time, because it's wonderful. As I said before, the community is really what drives this for me. Getting the people involved, hearing what other people have to say, and of course giving me a chance to bounce off other people's opinions, which is something so valuable for me, so that it's not me just sitting in here with a kind of an echo chamber of my own opinion. And clearly here in this case, Pineapple was one example. There was a couple others at the start where I took the time to go through and dissect and in many ways disagree with what other people are saying, but again, it's because I enjoy, and I hope you enjoy, listening to that dynamic of, it's not always my opinion, right? I don't want this to always be my opinion. So other people have opinions as well, and while I might disagree with you, it's important that those different opinions are there, so that it's not always just what I'm saying. So again, such for example as the Ravage Skip comment from Symphony at the end. Get some sparkling water going. I had an interesting thought just before I started recording, and I wondered, is there any possibility that squealing sound that I was talking about before, is there any way that could come from the sparkling water? If it's somehow picking up the sparkles and it's creating little kind of squealy sounds of that, probably not that likely, but it would be pretty funny if that was that was the case. So let's take a moment here to pour the rest of my can of beer and have all of that set up for the next little run out through the old adversary sort of analysis, the analysis, the strategy and the tactics. Again, similar to how I've done this before, I've got a bit of a strategic breakdown, and then I kind of dig in a little bit, sort of almost the layer below the strategy and what some of the tactics look like. A huge amount of what I'm going to say here has already come up in and around the comments and my responses to the comments, so we're already getting on. It's an hour and a half into the episode, and I don't want to labour this stuff too much, and I always say this, I talk about how I'm not going to go into this in great detail and then I just do it anyway, so I may well do it anyway, but hopefully I'm not going to take all day doing this. We're now 33 minutes past midnight. It's been a long day. I'm a little bit tired, but I'm still upbeat. I'm still enthusiastic, and I'm still enjoying myself. So we will keep going as long as I have beer and sparkling water beside me to keep me a little bit hydrated. I have a bit in me left yet. So okay, how do they beat us? Let's start there, right? Before we go into the how do we beat them, let's start with how they beat us. And I've got kind of three angles of attack essentially that they have on us. This isn't necessarily how we lose the game per se. We're going to start with how they attack us, and then I'll talk about how we lose the game. So these are sort of three things, and in a sense, these are sequential. These aren't kind of, first, top, and then the other things coming below. This is sort of sequentially what they do. The first thing they do is they pressure you early with the ravages. We've heard it from lots of people already. They've got right out of the gate, they hit you with the mining lands, and they start ravaging as early as the first turn. So those mining lands in particular here are what we're talking about here, doing that kind of multi-ravage sort of stuff. So that the early pressure really comes from the multi-ravages. Now, that can cause a lot of blight, right? Needless to say, we're talking about a lot of attacking early in the game. It can create a lot of blight on your board. Sure, we don't have the cascades, but it can still deal a lot of damage, and it can still cause you a lot of problems. It can, of course, as well start, destroying the hand or your presence. For example, if you're sort of situated on the board and you're perhaps a slower spirit and it's going to take you some time to get moving, if you just don't have the right draft or opportunities to draft or whatever, and you can't find defensive actions against them, they can start wiping out your blight or your presence pretty easily if you aren't careful or just lucky with how kind of your game is coming together. So look, the long and the short of it is that early pressure causes problems. That just kind of is it. And I think it was Nora Adrenal earlier saying, they come out a little bit slowly, especially at level 5 and below. I tend to disagree with that a little bit. I think they come out pretty hard, and I mean especially the HME6, that does cause a lot of those. It triggers a lot of those 3-land mining land ravages, which you wouldn't necessarily hit if you weren't playing up to HME 6, but that is not to say that earlier levels of HME can't cause problems early in the game, because I do believe that they can. So that's kind of your first thing. Second thing they do is then, again, it's sequentially. So you get hit by the early pressure, and that's out of the gate the first thing that you're having to think about and deal with. The second thing that you're kind of having to deal with then is the mining boom. And again, there's 2 levels of this, right? Whether you're playing at level 3 or level 5. But what mining boom essentially does, and we already talked about it, gives them a little bit more staying power so that they don't run out of gas. If you didn't have mining boom and you put a defensive spirit in the mix and you just started defending all those ravages, you would destroy this adversary. So clearly here, this gives them that extra bit of oomph that doesn't require the ravage step. So I really like the existence of mining boom, and I quite like how mining boom came together. I know there's another comment that said it's kind of a random array of a mix of things that don't really feel cohesive. For me, it feels, I think that's being a little unfair. I think it does feel more cohesive than that, and I like how mining boom works with and around the other abilities that this adversary have. But what it does is it does one of 2 things essentially. Either it gives you big giant lands full of loads of buildings that you can't solve, or at least, let's say, how does mining boom become a problem? When mining boom is a problem, what does it look like? One of 2 things. Either you've got big lands that you can't solve, and because you keep mining booming into them because you don't want to mining boom all over your board, so you do it multiple times into one land, or it gives you a whole bunch of kind of medium-sized lands. If you do mining boom into like maybe 3, maybe 4 different lands in the first kind of couple turns of the game, you end up potentially with a whole bunch of lands that are like maybe like explorer town city or town city or something like that. So it's like kind of medium-ish lands, not massive, but there's a bunch of them, and you can't deal with those. So mining boom can go wrong in 2 different ways, and they're your kind of 2 main ways in which it can go wrong. Now, up next then is the third thing that they do that attacks you, and it's the salt card. And in particular here, I've written that the salt card makes you go wide and tall, which is challenging. And if anyone's unfamiliar with the terms that I'm using there, so wide meaning you have many problems to deal with, and tall meaning it's maybe a big problem to deal with, as opposed to many, it's a big, right? So salt card kind of gives you both, in the sense that it goes wide, it creates a lot of ravaging lands. If you haven't kept on top of your land, your mining lands, and the number of invaders in lands, you can have a whole bunch of lands ravage when that salt card hits the ravage step. So it can do that, but it can also keep repeatedly hitting you with a big problem land or multiple big problem lands. So this is the kind of tall aspect of things, and the land will keep getting bigger. This is the other thing as well. So it hits you once. If you haven't dealt with it and you still can't deal with it in the slow phase, that's coming back and it's hitting you again next turn. But not only that, it's now bigger and more problematic, because when it hit you, if it you know, assuming that it's kind of maybe hit you more than once, this kind of cascade upgrade effect, it makes the land a bigger problem. Every time it hits you, it gets bigger. So it's got this idea of the wide with the many and the tall with the big. And for me, it almost forces you to have both in your locker. And again, we've talked about how much agency you have in this game. We will get into that now momentarily, but there are ways to manage that, but it kind of does force you to have a little of both, in many games at least I found against HME. So, they're the three things they do to attack you. How do we lose then in that case? For me, the one upfront, absolutely most surefire way that you lose the game to HME is that you lose control of the board. And actually, I can even almost pinpoint that even more and narrow that more down to, you don't have the mining lands under control after the salt card hits. Multiple people said it in the comments, and I can't agree more strongly. The salt card is the whole thing. And that's why I said, I guess at the top as well, that the real iconic sort of HME feeling and vibe is all based around the salt card. Now, I don't want to again undermine or diminish people who play up to level 3 and they haven't yet gotten to the level 4 with the salt card. So if you're listening into this, again, I in no way want to diminish your game experience here. Of course, what I do on this channel is I talk through strategies and ways to go about beating adversaries, generally from a level 6 point of view. But of course, a lot of what I'm saying can be applied up and down, all the way from base, all the way up to 6 of all the adversaries, right? And of course, when you're listening in that case, you're just picking which of those things are relevant across which levels, right? So, of course, I'm not doing a full breakdown, and it wouldn't make any sense for me to do that because it would just take forever. But in this case here, clearly, what I'm talking about is in particular, if you're playing against HME 4+ and you've got the salt card in your game, if that hits the board and you have not been planning and you now no longer have the ability to get those lands under control, this will lose you the game. That is your number one way to lose against HME, is once that Salt Ravage card does the explore, then it does the build, and then if by that point, if you've essentially reached the fast phase on the turn when that Salt card is now about to start hitting you, if you do not have a good grasp on your board, it will spiral incredibly quickly. Because as I said, those other invader cards are still coming behind it, right? That ravage card, that salt card, it sits there and it keeps ravaging every turn, but the life goes on and the game goes on, and all those other cards keep funneling down that conveyor belt, and it gets really bad really quickly. And that's why, as I said before, the HME doubles, putting HME into doubles with other adversaries is horrific. It's absolutely awful. It's the most difficult thing because of that, because of the way that kind of salt card functions. But even on its own, as I say, absolutely, definitely a very, very challenging thing to come back from. Like, if you lose control of your board against HME, it's very hard to get it back. That's your number one way you lose. And again, I should also probably mention here, clearly here, losing control of your board, you don't, there's no loss condition which says, have you lost control of your board? Yes or no, check the box, you lose. Clearly here, you're going to lose to Blight, right? Eventually you'll just keep ravaging, it'll ravage too much and you'll run out of Blight. But Blight was not the problem here. That's kind of the important point to mention here. The number of Blight on your card almost doesn't matter in this case. It's, if you've lost control of your board, you're not getting it back, and that's just it. And you could probably add 5 more Blight to your card and you'd still lose because the board is gone. So that's your number one. Then you've got a huge gap, right? A big gap. And then you're back to second place, which is what I've called here running out of time. And this is like a more normal game, if you imagine a more quote-unquote normal game of Spirit Island where it's back and forth, you know, stage 2 comes around, you kind of struggle through stage 3, you're starting to feel towards the end of your stage 2 cards like you're getting bigger and better than them, and you're on top of the invaders, and then they hit the stage 3 and then things start going really bad again, and you've got this kind of slugfest back and forth, and you struggle and you just about get over the line at the end. A lot of games of Spirit Island look like that, especially if you're playing at the level that's appropriate, the difficulty that's appropriate to your skill level. A lot of games will look like that, where it kind of gets towards the end and you just about win. You probably flip the blind card, things start going bad, and you just about get over the line, right? That doesn't happen very much, or it doesn't happen nearly as much with this adversary, I found. It's much more the former, in terms of if you're going to lose a game against HME, it's like a total loss. Like it just, you couldn't possibly come back. The board is just a mess. You can't get under control, as I say. The rabbits keep hitting you. You've got those big lands which you can't deal with, but you also can't deal with the other things, etc., etc. Much less often will you get into a game where it's like, oh, okay, right, yeah, no, I got all the salt cards under control. The big salt land problems are done. That's all behind me. Now I'm just going back to the normal sort of, you know, stage 2s and stage 3s, and then I end up in this kind of game where I just run out of time and they just about get me at the end before I get them. Far fewer games for me look like that. So that's your kind of second way to lose, is one of those games. And again, both games ultimately look like losing to Blight. You're never losing to running out of the invader deck against HME. That just isn't happening at all. I don't even have it on this list because it's not a thing. But the kind of just losing to Blight is what I'm talking about there. So ultimately 1 and 2 here are both losing to Blight, but they look very differently. And then for me then, back in third place, which is probably not that far behind number 2 in truth, is the actual loss condition. I've had very few games where it's even been a thing. Yes, there will be certainly games where I get pushed over the 8 limit, but you've got your slow phase and you've got your fast phase to deal with it. And usually what it would look like if you do lose to the loss condition, it'll be you play a turn where you didn't play any kind of slow power or an 8 or whatever that has something that can deal with a danger land. Right, a danger land will be one of your lands where you, for example, have 7 out of 8, and you don't play any way to kind of slow phase deal with that if you get edge cased. So you might have then an edge case comes up in your event, and it pushes you up to the 8, and you don't have a slow way to deal with it, and now you're panicking because now you have to go back in, and now you have to start digging for something. You have to search for a way. You know, maybe you don't have a fast way to deal with that, to deal with even a single explorer or a blight or whatever, and you now have to draft and you have to dig your way out of it. So that's kind of what it would look like if you've got a 7 out of 8 land and it's a risk land and you don't play a slow way to deal with it. That's your most likely way to lose to the loss condition. It's maybe happened to me once or twice where I have that panic mode where I have to go back and dig for a fast way, but usually when I'm playing HME, I am usually making a 7 out of 8 land, multiple of them most likely, because that's the way I like to play against them, which we'll get into. But I'm usually also trying to always have a slow way to deal with the problem if it gets out of hand. So there's your that's how they beat us. Now we're going to talk about how we beat them. Before I do, I'm going to very briefly, and because I'm going late, I'm really going to keep this brief. I'm going to talk about Magic the Gathering because it's my favorite. It's my second favorite thing to talk about still all these years later. Very quick anecdote here. So back in 2012, a set called Avacyn Restored was released that contained a card called Vexing Devil. Now, if you don't know Magic the Gathering, this will probably go slightly over your head, but I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. This is a card that it costs 1. It's called mana. In this case, you could imagine it being a one energy cost card. Similar enough in principle. It's a cheap card. It's a creature, which is a 4/3. In that case, that means 4 power and 3 toughness. So kind of it attacks for 4 and it defends of 3. Suffice to say, this is a very large creature for the cost of 1. Way, way, way undercosted in terms of what you usually pay for something that's 4 power and 3 toughness. Usually that will cost you about 3 or 4 mana as opposed to 1 mana. So very, very large for its size. And it's an ability, it essentially gives you, when you play this thing, you give your opponent the option. When it comes into play, the opponent can essentially an opponent can deal 4 damage to themselves to kind of destroy the thing on entry. So you essentially gives your opponent 2 options when you play this. They can let you have it, and that's it. It's just a 1-cost 4/3 with no downsides. You're done. Or when it comes into play, if they don't want you to have it, they can essentially take 4 damage to themselves. And you play a game with 20 life points in Magic the Gathering. So you basically take a chunk of 1/5 of your whole life total off you, which is a lot. So this is what something that they call the Punisher mechanic. It was something that came up in Magic the Gathering many years before that, and this was kind of my first introduction to this type of mechanic. It doesn't come up all that much, and it is essentially a mechanic that they used where they would give you a card that had 2 very powerful effects on it, 2 very undercosted effects, but it gave your opponent the choice of which one of those 2 things that they can have. The reason I bring up this Vexing Devil card is because when I saw this card, I'm like, that is the most broken thing I've ever seen. That is absolutely outrageous. It's either the 1 mana 4/3, which is just insanely strong, or it's a 1 mana deal 4 to them, which is also insanely strong, massively undercosted as well. So both of those things were massively undercosted. But it gave your opponent the choice, which is this whole Punisher mechanic thing. Now, I will have brought up that card on the screen if I remember to do it during editing to give you a little look at what that might look like. It's a funny little creature there. But I bought a whole ton of these when this set got spoiled first. I saw that card and I went straight onto the marketplace online and I bought like 30 of them or something like that. And it was like, they were like €6 each or something. I'm thinking this thing is going to be like a 30-40 euro chase rare in the set. Everyone's going to want these. This is broken. This is the most insane card I've ever seen. And it didn't see 1 lick of play. None. It came, the cards arrived and it tanked in value, and it ended up being like a 50 cent or a 20 cent bulk crap that got thrown into the back of a binder somewhere or thrown in the bin or something like that. And I lost a fortune on this particular speculation that I made on this card. And I learned a very important lesson that not that day, but that time period, let's say. I was quite new to the game. I'd only been playing for about a year up until that point, and I learned the value that day of giving your opponent choices. So that's a whole sidebar around Magic the Gathering, and a small little anecdote that that day I learned that even 2 highly powerful things, if you give your opponent the choice and let them pick which one of those 2 things you get, it ends up not being very good for you, because they always get the thing that benefits them. And in this case, with this particular card, if you played it on turn 1, you were not getting to keep that 4/3 creature because it's way too strong on the first turn of the game. They just take 4 life points and life goes on, and that's it. But if you played it late in the game and you really desperately want to deal those last 4 life points to them, they just give you the 4/3 creature because there's already loads of creatures on the board and it doesn't do anything anymore. And that was the story about that card, is it's never what you wanted to be, and your opponent's choice does a huge amount to undo the quote-unquote undercosting that this card looks like on face value. Now, why am I telling you about Vexing Devil and the amount of money I lost on that speculation and how I ended up with egg on my face? Clearly here, what we're talking about is this idea of agency, player agency, and giving the player the choice in how things play out. And there's so much of it in this adversary. Top to bottom, the whole card is absolutely full of player agency. You've got player agency in the lost condition in a sense, because you've got a lot of time to react. It's not an instantaneous thing. The escalation gives you the agency in which lands you pick that you escalate into. You've got the mining boom that lets you pick which lands. The salt deposits card, you know exactly when it's coming up, and you've got so much in terms of interplay, in terms of how you set up for how that particular card functions. The adversary is just full of these choices, and it's full of known information which give you these choices in a known information package. So that is going to be crucial, and what would appear at first glance like an outrageously strong ability or set of abilities, if we use that known information and agency to our advantage, we can really turn the screw on these. So with that all said, first of all, the overall strategy of how we beat them is going to start like this. First one is going to be that known information I talked about. So there's a couple of things in here that we really use to our advantage. The exact position in the deck of the salt card is huge. It cannot be understated. Knowing where that is and reminding ourselves right now it's going to be 1-1-1 to salt. So playing towards that card is everything in the game. And again, I do strongly recommend you go and check out my playthrough against them to see how I go about doing that, because I do it a lot in that video. Next thing, there's no coastal lands, which is huge. It's actually much bigger than it looks like at first glance. In most games of Spirit Island, you always have this element of, oh, well, I can't do this on the coast because there's a chance of that coming up, or in Scotland's case, that's definitely coming up. Knowing that you don't have a coastal lands to deal with in this particular adversary, very, very helpful in certain circumstances. So that's more known information. And then the other thing here about known information, which I can't stress enough, is the safety of that lost condition. Taking risks when it comes to the lost condition. And as I said, I absolutely love the big land strategy against HME. I don't like to mining boom all over the place, because I find it creates too many pockets of those kind of medium problems I talked about. I much prefer going all in on 1 or maybe 2 lands, create a 7 out of 8 land, and have it pretty safely sitting there until an event might throw me off. And then, as I say, hopefully I've got my slow power to deal with it already lined up. Next thing then, so that's our known information. That's our first key strategic thing here. Second thing is the board management. And this, again, this adversary is all about your board management. That's the whole game, especially, as I say, the control of the mining lands. So controlling if and when they explore, build, and ravage. You have so much agency and you have so much of a say in how they actually interact, and it cannot possibly be understated how powerful that actually is. So we talked about the rules in terms of what it actually looks like, of course. So the mining lands, they're once they hit 3, they do certain things. So it's that kind of threshold of the 2 to 3, and sort of controlling when and how that happens. It's everything here. And as I say, this is our kind of strategic oversight view. When I talk about tactics, I'll talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like and how to go about doing it. But I'm just cleaning my glasses right now, so I can't read the next bullet point. So just bear with me just a single second or two. That's all that. So that's your mining lands. Knowing the mining boom here. So actually, I jumped the gun and I talked about mining boom a little early, but mining boom, knowing your strategy and playing accordingly. So knowing your strategy, again, strategy is the key word here. Don't come into this game and think randomly on a given turn, what might I do about the mining boom? Know how you want to play your mining boom in advance. Again, I'm going to talk about my playthrough later on in terms of the Sun and the BlunderSpeaker game. I had a very clear strategy from before turn 1. I talked about it in the intro, exactly how I was going to play that game and exactly how my 2 spirits were going to, the roles that they were going to play in that game. And I already knew in advance how I'm going to deal with mining booms. And yes, it was mining boom into 1 land as many times as possible until it hits 7 out of 8, and then I'll think about other mining boom lands. And that is my strategy for the most part, usually against HME. It's not the only one. Other people might play it differently, but that's how I like to do it. Finally then, in terms of board management, is the escalation. Again, I talked about already with the agency and that using the escalation to prepare for the salt card is a big part of your known info as well as agency and how those two things blend together. Finally then, the go wide and the go tall. We talked already about how they kind of force you to go wide and go tall, so let's oblige. Let's go wide and go tall. So action economy is key against these, right? We talked about it before. We talked about it in Brandenburg, Prussia and others. Having good action economy, having high action economy to handle many lands is massive against HME. And I strongly advise, if you're picking a spirit, you want to go with someone who has high action economy as opposed to low action economy. But don't forget that you do also, especially if you play with, like I do with the mining boom, you're gonna need a nuke at some point. Now, there is a nice overlap here that you can get, and if you can find a spirit that gives you high action economy that also incorporates some kind of nuke in their innate, that's a bit of a best of both worlds here. So that's the type of thing you should really, if you're struggling with HME, you really need to be on the lookout for, can I find a spirit that gives me a lot of card play, a lot of actions, as well as a payoff for all those card plays in the form of a nuke. We've got one or two that we're going to talk about when we get to the kind of I've got a little section of a few example spirits that work really well, and that's going to be a key kind of part of that. So there's your strategies. Now we're going to talk about tactics, and we're going to do a little bit of this very good to very bad stuff that we saw before. So up front and center is going to be your mining lands. Manage your mining lands. I cannot say this enough. The number is 3. That's the key number. That's what we have to have in mind here at all stages of this game. So creating and removing the mining lands, so turning the ravage off or on, and that is important. Somebody mentioned this as part of the comments here. Sometimes you will want to turn a mining land on and have them ravage earlier than they normally would. So for example, they explore and say HME 6 is still on, it's an empty land, and they explore and they put 2 explorers into the land. Under normal circumstances, that's now about to build normally, and then it'll ravage then after that. But if we may decide to push an invader into that land, thus making it 3 invaders in the land, and now instead of building, it will ravage. There will be situations where that will be relevant. That type of thing does come up. You know, if you've got a defend power and you've got an explorer push, you might go, okay, great, I'll push 1 explorer in there. Now next turn, instead of adding another town to the board and giving me that problem on the following turn, I can push the explorer in and force them to ravage with 3 explorers. I've got my defend power lined up ready to go, and there's already maybe a hand in the land, something like that. So there will be spots where that will come up, so do be on the lookout for that. It's not just about turning off the mining lands, sometimes you want to turn them on as well. So that's one thing, but here clearly the whole crux of the whole thing is the prep for the salt card, and what I have here is a very small simple breakdown of the numbers which you need to be on the lookout for with your lands. Every land on the board, you need to be thinking about how many invaders are in that land 1 and even 2 turns before the salt card hits. And this is important, this is before the salt card explores. You need to be thinking about this. Ideally, in the best case scenario, have as many lands as possible which have 0 explorers in them. 0 invaders in them. That is crucial. Why? If a land has 0 invaders in it, what's going to happen? First, you explore. And by the way, we're assuming that once you reach the salt deposit card that HME 6 is turned off. That's going to be my second point in a moment, and I maybe should have put it up front because it would make more sense logically, but trust me, when it hits the salt card, you do not want HME 6 still active. That is for absolute sure. So let's just assume we've turned HME 6 off and our board contains at least 4 blight. Here's what happens. The land has 0 invaders. Salt explores. It adds 1 explorer. Next turn, it goes to build. It still has less than 3 invaders. It's still a non-mining land, so it's going to build a town. It now has 2 explorers. Then the salt card shifts over and it goes to the ravage spot, and now it tries to ravage and it checks the land. There's only 2 invaders in it and it will not ravage. This is key. That's the whole thing. That is your absolute ideal scenario. Start with 0, go to 2, and then it doesn't ravage. Now, clearly here, because the thing sits in the salt, or it sits in the ravage slot for the rest of the game, there will of course be subsequent turns where invaders will end up back into that land. It'll push it up to 3, and then it'll ravage. Obviously, that's kind of the normal procedures, and that's okay. But if we talk about just that first cycle of the salt card going explore, build, ravage, those 3 turns, multiple commenters mentioned that that's the whole thing. And if you can get to the salt ravage with as many lands as possible containing 2 or less invaders, that's key. So the easiest way to do that is start with a land with zero invaders. The next easiest way, and the next kind of best thing you can have, is to have your land have 3 invaders. Ideally 3 explorers, but whatever, doesn't matter. 3 invaders. Start with 3 invaders. Why? Well, what happens? Land has 3 invaders. Salt card explores. It doesn't explore into that land because it has 3 invaders already. Then it goes to the build. It doesn't build because it has 3 invaders already. Then, after you do that, of course, now it's going to ravage. If nothing else happens, it'll go to the ravage step, and it will, of course, ravage. Now, in the meantime, we're trying to get invaders out of that land, right? So we're then going to go and we're trying to, in the slow phase or on the fast phase in the next turn, we remove an invader from that land and we get it back down to 2. The easiest way to get it back down to 2 is, of course, to only have 3 invaders in the land. Then all we need to do is maybe push an explorer, for example, right? But anyway, I digress. The point here is that it starts with 3 invaders. If you start with 3 invaders, you add nothing else to the board. That's key. Now, next best. So we start with 0, that's the best. Start with 3, that's the second best. The next best after 3 is 2. Why? What does 2 look like? Well, it starts with 2, then we go explore, we add 1 explorer. Then we go build, it's not building anymore. And then, of course, the same pattern. When we get it to 3, then just before it ravages, we try to take 1 out, we get it back down to 2, and then it doesn't ravage anymore. But in this particular case, the only thing we've added to the board is 1 single explorer. So that's with 2 invaders. So we've gone 0, then we've gone 3, then we've gone 2. The next best after that is starting with 1 invader. And this is kind of the worst case scenario almost, because starting with 1 invader, what does that look like? The invader has the land has 1 invader. Then it explores, then it builds. So now we're adding an explorer and a town, essentially. Well, it depends what the first invader looked like, but we're essentially adding 2 different invaders to the land now. That brings it back up to 3, and then we still have that problem where we need to remove 1 and get it back down to 2. So it's gone. Now it's gone. The best is 0, then it's 3, then it's 2, then it's 1, and then finally it's 4+. So any land that starts with 4 or more invaders, it's not going to explore and it's not going to build. That's fair enough. But the problem is it's now going to have 4 invaders in it, and getting it down to 2 requires moving 2 invaders out of the land. So that's much more difficult than when the land starts with 3 invaders. So for me, that's the order: 0, 3, 2, 1, and then 4+ at the bottom. That's your kind of guideline of leading up to that salt card. As I say, don't wait until the last second, until it's just about to explore. Think about it in advance. Think about, as I say, the escalation. Where am I escalating on the board? Do I have a land that already has 1 in it? Okay, maybe I'll put it up to 2 because 2 is better than 1. Or maybe I have a land that already has 2 in it. Now I'm going to put it up to 3 because actually 3 is pretty good, right? So again, you're thinking about keep as many lands as possible with no invaders whatsoever, and then otherwise apply that kind of ordering and use those kind of tricks to your advantage. Mining Boom is another one. I have a land with a single explorer in it. I actually did this in my playthrough. This is one little spoiler, or one little sneak peek or snippet of something that happened in my playthrough. Mining Boom, about a turn before the salt deposits hits, I have a land on my board with 1 single explorer in it, and I choose the Mining Boom in there because that goes level up. It builds first, so it builds a town. Then it levels the explorer up into another town. So now there's 2 towns in the land after I Mining Boom. And that 2 will then take 1 explorer. So after the salt explores, it'll go up to 3. So then the land will contain explorer, town, but it won't build. So the net result essentially is going to be explorer, town, town. If I had left that land, the way it would have gone is starts with an explorer, gets another explorer, and then builds a town. So it almost ends up in the same end result, albeit one of the explorers gets upgraded into a town. So you kind of end up with, if you want to look at it this way, an extra point of damage and health in the land overall. But that's not a bad trade-off, because that sucked up an entire mining boom. So they're the little tricks you need to be on the lookout for as you start to get more and more used to working with HME. You start to see the patterns, and you start to look out for these little examples of which of my lands has more invaders or less invaders, or you're gonna end up with one. Like I said, the way I play is I'll have one land that has 7 invaders / blight. Usually it looks like maybe about 5, maybe 6 invaders. That's my horrible land. Then I've got, hopefully the rest of them I can now keep under control, so that once you hit that build, the key turn is when after they build in the mining land, you've got a slow phase and a fast phase before the salt card ravages, and there is your window to do as much as you can to reduce your lands from 3 to 2. That's the key. That's the whole game. And if you get enough of those lands reduced back from 3 to 2, you take the heat off yourself. You've got one big horrible land that's probably about to ravage right now, but now I can dedicate my actions to maybe dig for a big major, or use my big push for my big innate, or whatever it may be. So that, I spent a lot of time on that, folks, I know, but that for me is almost the entire game against HME 6. So hopefully that came across clear enough, and that maybe started to kind of twig some ideas for people on how to do this. I've already mentioned here what the next one is going to be. This is another very good tactic that you're going to want to use, and that is blight the island ASAP. Just turn off the HME 6. Get it done as soon as you can. Take the hit. Take your blight to scale. There's a key term that we've heard before. Take blight to scale in the early game. That means you may have an answer for the lands. You may be able to stop the blight. You might have a defend power. Don't use it. Let the land blight. Soak up the blight and get to 4 blight as soon as you can. Just get it done. Flip the blight card. Do whatever it takes. Just get it done. And what you gain by doing this as well, by the way, not only does it turn off HME 6, but it gives you a really nice opportunity to start to play ahead of the tempo. Because you just throw away your first 1 to 2 invader cards and just let them ravage, you can now start playing ahead of tempo and start to really think about those lands in advance of the salt deposit card. So it gives you so much in your game. It gives you so much back in your game if you do this. So I strongly encourage you to do it. The other thing that you can think about doing here, by the way, as well, that will come up in certain games, the way the invader order might come out, the cards, the way they come out, you might get a lot of cards that are, for whatever reason, attacking you in maybe Dahan lands, or maybe lands with your presence, or whatever. There may be reasons why, for whatever reason in your game, you want to prevent the blight coming in. Maybe you're a defensive spirit and that's all you can do, for example. That might be okay. And if you have one land, or one island board, or maybe 2 island boards, depending on the size of your game, you may have 1 or 2 boards that you decide to keep clean and not turn off HME 6, but that can still give you the opportunity to go nuts with blight on the other boards. So sometimes you won't just do it on every single board. You might use this kind of balancing act to not flip the blight card, but give a couple of your boards the chance to shut off the HME 6. So that could be a nice way to go about doing it as well. So there's one more very good, and the last very good I have is minor powers. Minor powers are just excellent against HME because the deck is just full of fantastic things. Defend and Dahan, we already talked about it being really good. A little note here on why it's so good is if you can do that, kind of force them to ravage. Or even maybe not even force them to ravage, just react to the extra ravages that they're doing. You shut off so much of their power. Like that example I talked about before, like if you just have 3 explorers in a land, a quick defend plus a hand counter attack just solves that whole thing for next turn. You solve the land on the build spot, and then when it hits Ravage, nothing happens. So if you do enough of that early, if you get enough of that in your game, you can just shut off the adversary at the source almost. It's something where I like doing either a lot of defend early. Now I'm talking about early in the game. I like doing either a lot of defend or maybe none. In the first couple of turns I'm talking about, this is where I'm talking about shutting off the HME 6. As the game starts to go longer, defend comes even better. It becomes better and better, and once you start hitting those kind of salt ravages and things like that, sometimes you'll have like, you defend the land, it ravages twice because of the salt plus the other card in the ravage slot, and defend just becomes so amazing there. So defend is almost at its best against this adversary. It's super strong. And I just gave one example of a card here, Encompassing Ward. It's a card, defend 2 in every land, for example, where target spirit has presence. Like, even defend 2 can be really good in this matchup, where against a lot of other adversaries, defend 2 might not be as hot. It can also be really good here, especially for dealing with the salt turn. After that, then I've got control and damage, and again, like I talk about, for all the reasons I just said, little pings of control, little pings of moving explorers. Back to one of the comments earlier on that said control strategies get shut off because there can be 2 explorers. Late in the game, turn 5, turn 6, push 1 explorer can be amazing. It shuts off a whole mining land. One single random push 1 explorer, like a disoriented landscape, very strong. All across the whole game. All of those kind of tempo type cards, they don't lose their value as the game goes along, so they're just really good there. And one other example I provided is Territorial Strife. I've talked about this card in the past where you've got a city land, and sure, I can add a strife, or maybe I can kill an explorer in a town, but there's a very good chance that this one card alone will not solve a land. But against HME, it can, because if you have, again, three explorers in your city land, kill 1 or 2 of them, and they'll push that back below the threshold on your happy days. So those kind of zero cost little bits and pieces effects, absolutely extremely strong here. The last card I mentioned is Lands of Haunts and Embers. It's a blight ad card, and I think the blight ad cards can also be excellent here because of naturally getting blight on the board, etc. So Land of Haunts and Embers is a card I have come up on a lot in recent times. I used to be pretty low on it. I'm actually quite high on the card. I think the card's very good. So that's that. After that, then Spirit Scaling. Again, early turns, give yourself the chance to scale. Ignore the board. Just take like 2-3 turns and just hyper scale. That is a legitimate approach to play this matchup. Let the whole board go to hell. Don't bother dealing with almost anything. Scale up, draft cards, hit your kind of, your kind of 2 presence placement option to just kind of get as many presents off your tracks as you can. That type of thing works. Like, just use those early turns to just let them do whatever they want almost, and then scale yourself up so that you're set up for the rest of the game. So that's another really strong approach for a lot of spirits. After that, then I've kind of got 1 or 2 neutrals here. The first thing is tokens. Disease is a bit of a trap, I find, against HME. What do I mean by that? Clearly, disease is good, right? I'm certainly not going to tell you that the token that stops them ravaging, the ravage skip token is terrible, because it's not. But it's a little bit of a trap for the same reason that I talked about before with skips. And I actually have skips as my other neutral here, so I'm kind of going to talk about them a little bit together here. Skipping ravages against HME only goes so far. Especially when we're talking about later into the game, when that salt card comes into play. Skipping one ravage, it's just kind of ravage next turn. What did you really achieve by skipping the ravage? Like, skips are usually so strong against most of the adversaries. One of the strongest things you can do, as you start getting really high difficulties as well, skips get better and better. Because it can just stop a problem. Just don't deal with that problem for now. Maybe don't take like the double blight or whatever it is right now, or the cascade or whatever, and I'll come back and deal with you later. Like, that effect can be so strong. But against HME, that doesn't work, because you don't come back and deal with it later. You're going to have to come back and deal with it immediately next turn. So skipping ravages with disease for that reason is not particularly strong. And again, I've already talked about skips. you're also not letting blight on the board. So if you're doing this early in the game, so later in the game it's not as good for that reason, but even earlier in the game, stopping ravages, sometimes you just need to let the blight in because you want to shut off HME6. So that's another reason why it's kind of not as maybe strong as it normally would. And one other thing about disease is, because we talked about at the top with it only works in mining lands, look for opportunities to use disease to stop bills. That's another way, by the way, to keep your lands below the 3 threshold for those kind of key salt turns. If you can find 1 or 2 spots on the board to get a disease in and keep it at 2 instead of 3, that can be a really nice use for disease that maybe isn't as obvious as you might think its use in the matchup. Strife is another one that's not particularly I'm particularly hot on here for hopefully obvious reasons. Again, the lands that have the 3 invaders are the ones that are ravaging. Strife only stops 1 of 3. It doesn't stop the amount of invaders ravaging, so it, in a sense, is weaker than I think it normally would be. Wilds, on the other hand, I think are stronger than normal here. While this is probably almost Wilds' best matchup, some would argue France are the best matchup for Wilds, and maybe that's true. But the reason why Wilds are so exceptionally strong against HME is which lands you need Wilds in, and that's not necessarily the case in all the other matchups, including France. In here, which land is your non-mining land for that salt card that's about to come up. If you can get a key Wilds into a land that has maybe only 1 explorer in it already, stop the explorer, and then when it builds, it only goes up to 2. So stopping 1 single explorer from a wild token can be the whole difference between that land ravaging for 4 turns in a row and not ravaging at all, which is absolutely massive. Last thing here is blight move, blight remove. I've got it kind of lumped in together here. It's awful. Do not remove blight. Don't bother moving blight. Don't faff around with any of that kind of stuff. Just take the blight, flip the blight card, accept the chaos like I do, learn to love it, and focus on the invaders and the mining lands, and you will be fine. Now, we're nearly done in terms of all of that. I did mention I had a couple of spirits here. I'm not going to spend much time on this, the same way I didn't just spend 40 minutes on the previous section, but I've got a couple of things. It kind of threw in a few here, defensive and control and offensive. Just some examples here of stuff that works pretty well. Eyes watch from the trees is maybe the best spirit against HME. 2 of its 4 uniques deal with invaders. 1 of the 4 uniques is a fantastic defend power. Its innate is defend, and obviously when it uses defend, it pulls the hand in, so it actually clears the invaders as well. It's got tons of fear, so it starts to churn through the fear deck as well. Basically, everything it does is fantastic. Hearth Vigil is also really quite similar, and it's clearly one of the best spirits in the game, and this is probably arguably its strongest matchup. It's got 2 of its 4 innates deal with invaders again, so little bits and pieces of move and damage. Both of its innates are super strong. Even the right innate that does those little mini pings that often doesn't come up in many games, really strong here. And its left innate is just broken. And here I think is a good example that I talked about before, where if you go heavy card plays to get lots and lots of actions, and your payoff is a really strong innate that can go ahead and deal nukes. In this case with Hearth Vigil, it doesn't necessarily deal nukes, it just wipes out like 4 or 5 lands. So you're building up to something very meaningful at the end of the game, and you can maybe throw a major in there to deal with your nukes. But a key part in that is if you're playing with Hearth Vigil and you're going bottom track focus to try upgrade the left innate, you probably don't play the go tall approach. You're probably much more likely to mining boom across your board and create lots of those kind of medium-sized problems, because that's where Hearth Vigil absolutely excels with its left innate. So interesting little kind of again, you've got a strategy for the whole game. Your mining boom, everything, it's a strategy from the very beginning. Now, control. So they're your defensive options. Control option, Lure of the Deep Wilderness, I think is a good option here. Again, 2 of its 4 uniques deal with invaders in some way, and one of them is the Softly Beckon Ever Inwards, which is just broken. It can solve like three salt lands or something like that. One of the 4 makes a disease, which as we know, it can be pretty strong, and then both the Urinates are really good for kind of gathering things, destroying things, all of that kind of stuff. So that's again another one where you can go heavy bottom plays. I think you can get up to 5 card plays with Lure, and then you can start to look to max out both Innates, which at their max levels again can be very, very strong. Sometimes even in big lands, but also sometimes just pulling from multiple lands as well. So it's a really good option there. And then finally, then your offensive option is Volcano. Somebody mentioned there that about the 6 boom builds that I saw in my Volcano guide. I'll go ahead and link that again in the description for anyone if you'd like to read it. I do have a kind of a guide in terms of the 6 boom build and how that all works, and I do of course in there recommend that if you're playing against HME, the 6 boom is the way to go. Basically, when you're doing the 6 boom Volcano, as most people probably know, it requires a bit of time. You kind of just sit there and you sort of just gain as much presence as you can, build up, the stuff around you kind of goes to hell a little bit, and then you were up for 6 and you just destroy everything. And that works really well here for hopefully obvious reasons by now, is you just take multiple turns at the start of the game where you just don't deal with what the invaders are doing very much. Let them just do their thing, let them blight the land, flip over the blight card, hope it's not one of those blight cards that takes your presence every turn, and then you just 6 boom and to pick 1 or 2 majors to deal with the rest. So pretty good there. So that is all of that. That is our HME breakdown. That's how to play against them. That's how they try to beat you, and that is how you can go about beating them. I do, of course, have a little section here, as I do at the end of every episode, to talk about the playthrough that I did. I've alluded to quite a bit of this already throughout the episode in bits and pieces here, so I won't spend too long talking about the how, but I'll do a little bit of the what. There were a couple of mistakes in the game, as always. I won't dwell on them here. There was 1 or 2 that I mentioned as part of the thing, and there was actually an alternate ending to the game, which you got 2 for 1 a little bit as part of that thing. Hopefully by now you have picked up that I would like you to go and watch it, because it was a really amazing game. Like, it was really so much fun. It was a fantastic game to play. I had a ball playing it. There were some super interesting moments and really kind of thinky, kind of go in the tank and come out with some really awesome stuff as part of that. So I really do strongly recommend you go and watch it. I'll put the link up here, of course. Go and watch that game. But for everyone else, we'll go ahead and we'll dig into it a little bit right now. I did win. It was a rather resounding victory in one sense or another. It was a turn 5 fast win. So again, we talked about HME being shorter games. This very much coincided with that. Coming into the game, I had a very clear plan, as I say. Sun was going to be the big nuke. Sun was going to deal with the big lands, those big 7 out of 8 lands. That was Sun's problem across the island, and I knew that right away. So I was going Sun, top track majors, and Warrior was going to be the small skirmisher. Get around the board and do more of the dealing with those little, instead of 3, get it down to 2 type of abilities. Go bottom track, go minors, and get as many effects as possible. So that was my plan coming into it. I flipped the bite card as early as possible. I let both lands go on like the 2nd or maybe 3rd turn. I flipped both, I think one of them on the 2nd and one on the 3rd, something like that. And I flipped Aid from Lesser Spirits, which is only a 2 blight per player, which was a little bit hairy when it flipped over. Because when I flipped that over, it put 4 blight on the card, but I still needed to take 1 more actually on the side of Sun to be able to shut off HME. So I had to go down to 3 blight left on the card, and I purposely did it. When I flipped that over, even though it was only 4 blight left on the card, there's no way I was backing off from my plan. I immediately went and added 1 more the following turn, and that was still going to be my plan. So I did not shy away from the the goal of shutting off HME 6, and it paid off. I went down to 3 blight. I went down to 2, I think, actually, because then I went and used Sun's ability, which adds a blight as part of the the left and 8, which I was happy to do as well, because again I had a kind of a strategy of how it was all going to come to fruition, and a big part of that strategy was my draft on the second turn of the game with Sun, and I found Exaltation of the Incandescent Sky. And I have been talking online about this card for close to a year now, about how good this card is. And please believe me, if you don't already know or believe how good Exaltation of the Incandescent Sky is, go and watch this game, because this will show you exactly what happens every single time I draft this card. The card is insane. The card is unquestionably, in my mind, one of the S tier majors in the deck. I think it is the 5th best card in the major power deck. That is as high praise as I can possibly give this card. The 5th best. I think it's only behind Paralyzing Fright, Indomitable Claim, Power Storm, and Vigor of the Breaking Dawn, which are the 4 most iconic and probably most well regarded as the 4 best majors in the deck. I think Exaltation is 5th. It's the card is just insane. It just wins the game. I don't care that it costs 7 energy. What you get from that card is beyond broken. That's all I'm going to say about it right now, because I will have more words to say on that card in the future. But please, for the love of God, go and watch the game, because it was amazing and it enabled some fantastic plays. And like I said, there was a lot of I need to go on the tank and figure out how to do this right now and come out with the answer at the end of it. It was just so much fun, and I had a blast with it. So fantastic there. There was obviously all the stuff with Sun about planning adding the extra blight. Where am I going to find the moon and for the moon and 8 to stop the blight ad? The Aid for Lesser Spirits gave us, it gave Spur on with Words of Fire, which was like an extra card play and really good elements, and there was all sorts of really fun stuff going on. Warrior I had a blast with as well. I have to say I really like ThunderSpeaker, base ThunderSpeaker. Up until this game I was not really a fan of either of the aspects very much. I think I only played both of them once, and I just didn't really feel they came together very well. But I really came up on Warrior quite a bit in this game. Not necessarily on power level. I still think it's probably pretty far behind base ThunderSpeaker on power, but from an enjoyment perspective, I really did enjoy it. I liked the little aspect of moving the warrior around, and the flavour and the feeling of being the Incarnate and moving around the land and having a more tangible presence on the land really did feel different to me, and it felt more ThunderSpeaker in that sense, which I really, really did enjoy. So for probably similar reasons to why I like Hostility Keeper is why I like Warrior, and why I see it actually in a more favourable light now, because it gives you another feeling to play a spirit, and it's not necessarily a more powerful, it's actually definitely not more powerful in my mind, but it's different and it's fun. So really big fan of all of that. Relentless Gaze of the Sun is broken. It's probably in my top 5 spirits in the game, from a fun perspective, and almost borderline from a power perspective as well, because that spirit is insane. But huge fun. Please do go ahead and check all of that out. But that is going to be it. We are coming almost to the end of the episode now. We do of course have a little sort of a teaser, and we're going to talk through our kind of options for the next playthrough. Next up is going to be, with 3 adversaries left, so what order do they come in? It probably won't be too much of a surprise to anyone to find that in 3rd place, behind the other 2, 3rd place is going to be Habsburg Livestock Colony. So it's the other Habsburg. They're in 3rd place. So, okay. I've got them at 10.5, right? So I had sort of HME sort of standalone as a 10. 10 asterisk, I'm going to say. In hindsight, after the dust has settled at the end of this episode here, I will say there is a bit of an asterisk beside that 10. I think the better you are at the game, the lower HME falls. I think when you really get a good handle on how to do all that mining stuff and really have the really strong strategy and be really experienced with managing the salt card, I do think that probably drops back at least on par with Scotland and Brandenburg Prussia, which I had as kind of 9.5s, if you will. Again, it's all relative speaking. That's the only reason I did that. And I think probably if I had to say for myself, my own perspective, like how they are for me from a difficulty perspective, I'd maybe push them back a little bit. But I think on average, I think it's probably a fair assumption to say that they're more difficult on average than the others. That's kind of why I put them where I did. But for me, unquestionably, the next up and the last three are fixed, and they're all distinctly more difficult than the other five. Habsburg Livestock Colony, I have it at 10.5, and I think Habsburg Livestock Colony is closer to the other two than most people would want to admit. That's for another episode, but that is who is coming up next. For the Habsburg Livestock Colony, we do, of course, have a poll, and I do want to mention here that we are actually going to have, I think I said it at the top of the call, there's going to be a special announcement. I am going to have my first guest episode. That's going to be coming up next. So keep an eye out for that one. I'm not going to announce who it is right now, but it is big and it is going to be amazing, and I am super excited about it. I'm recording it this weekend and it's going to be fantastic. So I have a guest episode coming out now. That's going to happen before Habsburg. So you're going to see and you're going to hear about all of that before Habsburg comes out. But from a kind of a sequencing perspective here, it still makes sense for me right now, as part of the launch of this episode, I'm going to do the poll for the Habsburg playthrough. And that's what we're going to get to now in just a second. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the guest episode. And I'm also going to do the playthrough that's kind of quote unquote linked to the guest episode. So they're going to be the kind of next two episodes that come out. And then Habsburg Livestock's going to happen after that. But that's going to be amazing. And I can't wait for it. And you're all going to see it. And you're all hopefully going to love it. And it's going to be all kinds of great news. But that's going to be for the next day. For right now, we've got our three options for Habsburg Livestock, and the three options are going to start with our easy matchup, of course, and this is going to be, for the first time as an option on the channel, Shifting Memory of Ages, which is one of my favorites, but with the intensify aspect, and it's going to be with Fractured Days Split the Sky. This is your easy option, apparently, and this is your team support. Clearly here, memory and fractured, very steeped in the support mechanics. Memory is a super interesting one here. So I think I've mentioned it before, Red Revenge is very high on the intensify memory, much higher than I am. And I love memory. I love Mentor, though. Mentor is my boy. But I've only played intensify once, and I didn't love it. I'll be honest. And I want to love it because it looks awesome. And when I read it first, I thought it was incredible. But when I played it, I was like, oh, this isn't quite coming together. So I really want to give Intensify another chance. And I would love to do it on the channel. And apparently, Red Revenge has Habsburg listed as an A, but like the other two, the base and the mentor, as like a D or something. So like he's got like from a D to an A in his rating, and I was like, okay, let's see what that's all about. So I do not know why or how that goes from a D to an A with the intensify aspect, but I'd love to find out. So that's going to be your easy option. I'm not sure that's going to be as easy as he thinks, and I'm not sure that is a particularly easy matchup, but that's what we've put. That's your option for the easy. Up next, it's going to be your hard matchup, and this is going to look like Ember-Eyed Behemoth and Grinning Trickster Stirs Up Trouble. This is your team Durable. So we talked about Durable a small bit during this episode, and we now know, or if you know it already, Durable is all about the towns of Habsburg Livestock, and if they're not in lands with blight, they're very hard to kill. Behemoth is a big old basher and does loads of damage, but that will struggle in the lands without blight. That will really struggle against durable towns. And Trickster is somewhat similar. Trickster's got quite a few little bits and pieces of damage, as well, of course, as the kind of strife and looking at kind of the hand counterattacks as a thing, both of which will struggle against durable. So Red Revenge has Behemoth as a B and Trickster as a C. So that's your B and your C. That's your hard option. Up next, last option is your wild card option, and that's going to be a Spread of Rampant Green with the Tangles aspect and Lure of the Deep Wilderness. We talked about it on this episode, and it's your option for the wild card option. And this is your kind of tokens team, and this is going to be clearly here. Tangles is very much in the kind of wilds side of things. So I was looking at Tangles, and it deals some damage. It does some wilds. It does a few bits and pieces. Again, Red has it listed as a B matchup. Let's see. I can see Green struggling a little bit here, actually, in truth. I'm not sure whether that B is highly accurate, because it leans into the defensive innate, which not so strong against Habsburg. Habsburg ravages for a lot. But you lose Gifted Proliferation, which I do quite like about Tangles. Like, I didn't really fully vibe with Tangles when I played with it. I would also love to give this one another chance as well. So we've been meaning to get Green back on the table. So it's another one I'd really like to try out here. And Lure the Deep Wilderness, while not my favorite spirit, in truth, again, I there's some interesting things about how Lure would go ahead and play into Habsburg. So they're listed by Red as both Bs. So a B matchup overall, which was certainly not strong, but maybe not weak either. So very much in that wild card spot. So there's your three options, right? All three very, very interesting to me. I can see how Habsburg does things that these three sets of spirits do not like. And Habsburg does things that most spirits do not like. I think they're really challenging. They're very dynamic, very, very rewarding when you get it right, but very challenging to play against. So I'm really looking forward to that. But as I say, in the meantime, we've got the special guest episode. We've got all that good stuff going on. We are now 2 minutes 36 into the recording. That brings us to 38 minutes past 1 in the morning, and my wife is going to kill me tomorrow. I did get the all clear before starting. She wanted me to wait until tomorrow. I didn't want to wait until tomorrow. There's going to be kids everywhere. Recording during the day with the sun coming in the window and all that is a nightmare. I had a feeling, I did tell her that this would probably only go about 2 hours. We're nowhere near 2 hours at this point. We're 2 hours 36. But look, as always, if you stuck with me until the very end here, it is so hugely appreciated to have you here. I really, really do so much appreciate it. It's wonderful to have you along for the ride. If you're new, of course, to the channel, please do consider hitting the old subscribe button there, so you're getting the notifications and all of that good stuff when more content comes out. And for anybody who's here, please do, of course, hit the old like, share with your friends. Jump down in the comments. Let me know, what do you think about Habsburg Livestock? I'd really, really love to hear. Any of the spirits I mentioned, for example, with the options there, is there any of them that you have some experience with that you can maybe drop a little hint or two, or a little trick or two up your sleeve? I would certainly love to hear all of that. But look, that is going to be it. I'm out of breath. I need to go to bed. I'm tired. I've got a day ahead of me tomorrow. I need to go and enjoy the sun at some point tomorrow before it goes away, because we're Ireland and we don't get very much sun. But look, that's going to be it. Until the next time, may your manifestations be always powerful and glorious. See you then.